Fluoride is this sacred cow, not to be touched. It's like mom's apple pie and all American good and safe, and you don't question fluoride.
Paul Connett, Professor Emeritus of Chemistry from St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, and now the Executive Director of the Fluoride Action Network. 14 years ago, my wife put a bundle of papers down on my table and said, "Dear, would you read these?" And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "Fluoride, fluoridation." I said, "Take that stuff away. These people are crazy." At that time, I felt that fluoridation was all cut and dried, it was safe, it worked well for teeth and so on, no problems. After I read the papers, the scientific papers, I was really rather humbled and embarrassed, because I realized that this impression that I was walking around with, that there was no issue here, there was no debate, was clearly not true. There were very serious questions. One of the issues that concerned me greatly was how low the level of fluoride is in mother's milk. It's actually as low as 0.004 parts per million, which means that a bottle-fed baby in a fluoridated community where the parents make up the formula with fluoridated tap water is going to get 250 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. And I felt then, and I feel now, that nature wouldn't have screwed up on something as fundamental as what a baby needed for healthy growth. And as I read more, I realized that there were some serious health concerns here. And as I read still more, it was clear that there was no difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. And also, even though most people have been persuaded that everybody is doing it, and you could argue that most people are doing this in the United States, but most people in the world are not doing it. Most countries are not fluoridated. 98% of Europe is not fluoridated. The majority of countries are not fluoridated. In fact, there's only 8 countries in the world that have more than 50% of their water fluoridated. So the odd men out are the people that fluoridate. If you get chance to talk to an audience with an open mind, an audience that's prepared to listen, it doesn't take very long to persuade them that this is a very silly practice. It's bad. It's a bad medical practice. When you think about it, once you put it in the water, you can't control the dose. Once you put it in the water, you can't control who gets it, which means the very young, the very old, the very sick, the people with impaired kidney function, the people with poor diet. And also, there is no individual supervision. There's no doctor checking to see if there's any side effects. And if you believe in fluoridation, that you believe that there's this single drug in the world that has no side effects. It would be absolutely remarkable if fluoride had no side effects. And the only way they're able to maintain this very unlikely position is that they're not doing comprehensive health studies in the United States to see if communities that are fluoridated are experiencing greater health problems. Are they experiencing arthritis? That's important because there is an increase in arthritis in the United States, and we know that the first symptoms of fluoride's damage to the bone is just like arthritis, pains in the joints, in the bones themselves. Another thing that's associated with fluoride is lowered thyroid function. Again, we have a huge epidemic of underactive thyroid gland in the United States, with symptoms like lethargy, chronic fatigue, depression, obesity, and so on. All of these things are all around us, but nobody is checking to see if there's any relationship between people drinking fluoridated water their whole lives. By the way, that's another reason why fluoridation is so preposterous. You are giving a drug to people for them to drink every day of their lives for the rest of their lives. I mean, it is, quite frankly, it's one layer of preposterousness on top of another. And to top it all, to make it a very clear case of bad medicine, you're not giving people informed consent. You're allowing a whole community to do to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. An individual doctor cannot force a patient to take medicine. They are required to tell them the benefits and the downside, the side effects. And once the patient has heard these, then they are supposed to make up their own mind. We haven't given our consent to this. To me, it's the height of arrogance. We are meant to believe that just because they put on a white coat and tell you that they're the experts, that we have to take this medicine. It's absolute nonsense. And the other thing which is preposterous about this is a dentist has skills on teeth. We go to dentists for them to drill and polish and do other things with our teeth. Those dentists are not trained. They're not specialists in the brain, in the bone, in the thyroid gland, in the lung, in the kidney, into hypersensitivity, into margin of safety analysis, into risk assessment, in toxicology. They don't have any of the skills which will enable them to go to the public and say it is safe. They haven't done the reading, they don't have the skills. It's as I say, it's the height of arrogance. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention only has one division involved with the fluoridation issue, and this is the Oral Health Division, about 30 staff. If you look at their qualifications, they're nearly all dentally trained, and their function is to promote fluoridation. It's been the policy of the US Public Health Service to endorse fluoridation and promote fluoridation since 1950. And all they're doing is to promote it. And they do it very aggressively. They send their personnel to state legislatures and support mandatory fluoridation. So they're very aggressive and enthusiastic about this practice, and they promote it. And therefore they have a huge conflict of interest when it comes to a question of whether this practice that they have promoted for 60 years, whether they have a conflict of interest when they tell you that the process is effective and safe. This is what is very peculiar, because as the evidence of effectiveness gets weaker and weaker, as they admit now that the mechanism, they got the mechanism wrong for over 50 years. For over 50 years they thought that the baby had to swallow the fluoride, and the fluoride would be incorporated in the growing enamel. So when the teeth erupted through the gums, they would be harder and more protected against acid attack. They now say no, that doesn't work that way. It works topically, it works from the outside of the tooth. So they've changed the mechanism. Well, as this evidence for lack of benefit and the evidence of harm gets stronger, they seem to want to fluoridate more. They seem to, right now, they want to introduce mandatory fluoridation in Oregon, in Pennsylvania. They've talked about Massachusetts. They've just got it through Louisiana. They've just got it through Nebraska, mandatory fluoridation. In Australia, they've just got mandatory fluoridation through in Queensland. In Victoria, they're forcing it on communities without even giving them a chance to vote on it. And it's puzzling why they continue to promote this so aggressively. And a lot of people have asked, where's the money in this? Follow the money. Well, it's difficult, which there are many industrial interests that use fluoride. They may be worried about liability. We have sugar interests. They've always wanted to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. So for them, fluoride was the magic bullet. We have the pharmaceutical industry and others using fluoride in dental products. They may be worried about liabilities. The American Dental Association may be worried also about liabilities because they've endorsed these fluoridated products, and if it's shown that fluoridated water causes problems, then all these other products are also liable. But I think the real issue here is loss of credibility. I think the US Public Health Service and all its minions, the NIH, the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, and so on, have all promoted fluoridation so aggressively, so enthusiastically. Every Surgeon General has endorsed fluoridation since 1950. And I think now they feel that if they admit that they were wrong, that this is going to harm their other public health projects. My advice to them is the way to minimize liabilities is to stop fluoridation in the name of the precautionary principle. That way you don't admit to anything. You're not saying we think that fluoride damages bones and that's why we're stopping, because if you did it that way, then the lawyers would be jumping up and down across the country and having lawsuits for everybody who's had a hip fracture, everybody's got arthritis, everybody's got lowered thyroid function. So I think that's the way. As Bill Hersey at the EPA said it very well. He says they're riding a tiger and they don't know how to get off. They've told everybody for years that it's safe and effective, and it's neither, but they don't know how to admit up to that. But as I say, I think careful application of the precautionary principle would get them out of a tight corner. You've got two choices. Either they're aware but they're frightened of telling the public and admitting this, or they're totally, utterly incompetent. They can't read. I mean, all you've got to do is to read the literature. The open literature, there's a lot on fluoride's damage to the bone. There's a huge amount of literature now on fluoride's damage to the brain. And incidentally, there is no argument about fluoride's ability to damage the body. It's a known highly toxic substance. Millions of people worldwide have had their bones wrecked and other tissues impacted by natural fluoride. We've known forever that it interferes with enzymes, interferes with other aspects of biology and biochemistry. And it's also very clear and well established in literally hundreds of articles from India and China and other parts of the world which have high natural levels that people's lives have been ruined by exposure to fluoride. Skeletal fluorosis, damage to the brain, damage to the kidney and other things, well established. The only argument that's left is there an adequate margin of safety between the levels which cause this harm in the literature and the levels at which people are exposed in a fluoridated community. Now, I would state quite clearly and categorically that there is no adequate margin of safety to protect everyone in society drinking fluoridated water. So it's a practice that should be ended as soon as possible. And it's not as if we don't know that it's harming people. There are 32% of American children, and this is a study conducted by the Center for Disease Control in 2005, admits that 32% of American children have dental fluorosis, which indicates that they've been overexposed to fluoride, not just in fluoridated water, but from all sources of fluoride, dental products, air pollution, some foodstuffs, and of course fluoride in water, and also fluoride in the foods and beverages which have been prepared with fluoridated water. You add all that up, and our kids are being overexposed to fluoride. And their gamble, always they say that dental fluorosis is a cosmetic effect. Nonsense. It's the first indication that the body is being poisoned by fluoride. And the open question is what other tissues have been damaged. You know, as far as thyroid function is concerned, doctors in Europe between the 1930s and the 1950s used to give patients sodium fluoride tablets to lower the activity of the thyroid gland. What's it going to do to somebody who's has normal thyroid function, or someone who's already got low thyroid function or borderline thyroid function? I think it's reasonable to suggest that it could make things worse. And yet they're not looking at that. It's reprehensible, it's irresponsible, but it all goes to point to the fact that right now they're more interested in protecting this policy and their credibility than they are interested in protecting the health of the citizens of this country and the other citizens in other fluoridated countries. The EPA has no jurisdiction per se over water fluoridation because they don't have any jurisdiction over the additives, the chemicals added to water. That comes under the National Sanitation Foundation, a private entity, would you believe. What the EPA does is to regulate pollutants or contaminants of the water. They set a safe standard for any contaminant, any material that's likely to end up in the water when water percolates through rocks. So there's a standard for arsenic, there's a standard for lead, and there is also a standard for fluoride. And since 1986, that standard has been 4 parts per million. And the National Research Council, who did their review at the request of the EPA and funded by the EPA, after 2.5 years came back and said the 4 parts per million standard is not protective of health, and you should do a new health risk assessment to determine a safe MCLG. MCLG stands for maximum contaminant level goal. That is the safe standard based upon the best science with an appropriate safety margin put in to protect everyone, because the Safe Drinking Water Act should protect everyone, the standard. Well, after 4 years plus, the EPA has not done that, and yet the calculations are relatively simple. The National Research Council did all the work that they were requested to do. Nearly all the endpoints that they need are there. The levels which cause those endpoints are there. All they have to do is to take those endpoints and apply standard procedures. And if they would do that, then the MCLG that they would come up with would be far less than 1 part per million, And of course, if they did that, it's the end of water fluoridation. So the EPA, if they did their job, would be able to end water fluoridation tomorrow. But you can imagine in Washington, if that happened, it would be like a volcano from the US Public Health Service. So right now we believe that the US Public Health Service is trying to keep the lid on the EPA to not, or delay and delay and delay that final determination of the MCLG. Well, you know, in the last couple of years, we have a new president. And one of the things that President Obama has said is, I want to see scientific integrity and transparency in our regulatory agencies. I want them to do their jobs honestly because of all the scandals about industry influence and pressure, the pharmaceutical industry on NIH, on CDC, and so on. And so what we need is for President Obama to match this beautiful sounding rhetoric with reality. And the quickest place to do that is with the EPA. So we need President Obama to say to the EPA, do your job. Do your job scientifically, do your job honestly. Let's have a safe MCLG. And one extra thing, I will protect any scientist at the EPA that does this honest job. You will not be fired under my watch. You won't lose your pension, you won't lose your promotion, you won't be fired, you won't be harassed or penalized in any way. And it's sad to have to even suggest that that might be necessary, but we've had situations in the past where scientists at the EPA have been fired because they were outspoken on aspects of fluoride's toxicity. So there we have it. We could be ending fluoridation tomorrow if the EPA did its job, or even more importantly, if the President of the United States instructed the EPA to do its job and protect the American people, and instead of trying to protect the backsides of the bureaucrats working in the US Public Health Service. It's not just the future of water fluoridation that I'm concerned about. I am concerned about the future role of honest science in government. And I think that's the serious thing. When you drive a wedge between honest science and public health policy, and the public's trust, I don't think we can afford to lose any more the public's trust on our agencies. I think the public has lost trust in politicians. I think now everybody believes that politicians, spin things. They have agencies, PR firms, which spin everything. But I think the average citizen expects, and certainly has the right to expect, that the bureaucrats that are working in these regulatory agencies do not spin, do not massage the data, that they do everything honest that they can, so that when they provide the reports to the political leaders, the leaders have the best science in front of them. They shouldn't be provided reports which have been spun by external interests. In our case, spun by the dental lobby, or spun by the people that don't want to give up this practice from the US Public Health Service. So now that we have a politician who claims that he wants scientific integrity, we need that to be demonstrated. We need it pretty quickly so that we can begin to regain the trust of the American people in the EPA, in the FDA, in the CDC, in the NIH, and all the other agencies. That it's our money. It's our money to protect them. If they want to go and work for industry, let industry pay their wages. But as long as we're paying their wage packet, we want honest science. If you don't have honesty in science, you don't have science. And if you don't have science, you really don't have a credible public health policy. The Canadian Dental Association is on record as recommending that patients do not use supplements for fluoride for babies. The ADA recommends that parents not use fluoridated water to make up baby formula. They haven't made much of an effort to get that information to the public. But it's very clear that they have conceded that the major benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. Meanwhile, they also know that the dental fluorosis is a systemic effect, and we also worried about other effects. So why on earth would you expose the baby's developing tissues to a known toxic substance for which the benefits of the treatment are topical, and you've got other methods of achieving it, and for which all the risks are systemic. It simply does not make sense. And if a doctor recommends that, then they should be told very politely, you should go and read the literature. Simply read the literature. But unfortunately, the doctors and dentists, by and large, are extremely busy with their practices, and they don't have time to read the literature. And rather, they simply rely on recommendations by agencies and associations which have, if you like, a stake in promoting this practice. The ADA is very much involved in this, promoting this practice, and so is the CDC. So you're not getting objectivity from these agencies, but these are agencies that normally, and the AMA for that matter, the AMA takes its cue from the ADA. So the AMA takes its cue from the ADA, and the doctors take their cue from the AMA, the dentists take their cue from the ADA, and everybody takes their cue from the CDC. And the only way out of this is for doctors, dentists, and scientists to read the literature. And after 14 years, I got so frustrated with this because it's so difficult to get this information out in sound bites, in letters to the editor, TV interviews, and so on, because they won't debate it publicly. I mean, I'm not making this up. It's in the literature. There's been some extremely important cases, and I will give you 3 of them, of where people that have been aggressively, actively, professionally promoting of fluoridation and have read the literature and changed their position. The first one was John Cahoon, who was the principal dental officer for Auckland, New Zealand, and was a prime promoter of fluoridation in that country. And he went on a world tour, and he found out behind the scenes that the researchers were telling them they were finding no difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. And he had the grace to change his mind and actively work against it. Same with Hardy Lineback, who was the former president of the Canadian Association for Dental Research, was a spokesperson for the Canadian Dental Association on fluoridation. He did the same thing. He read the literature. The thing that triggered it for him was discovering that the fluoride that they were using in water plants is not pharmaceutical grade that you get in toothpaste, but it is an industrial hazardous waste product which comes from the phosphate fertilizer industry, which is not allowed to be dumped into the sea. They allow us to put it into our water. So he's been very important. In fact, Hardy Lineback was on the National Research Council report I've referred to earlier. And the third person is Bill Osmondson, a dentist who practices in both Washington and Oregon State. He had promoted fluoridation for 25 years. He too read the literature, has changed his position, and now is actively working to help his colleagues and the public try to stop this practice. The people that promote fluoridation have had a very simple strategy for over 60 years. Their strategy is to keep scientists, dentists, and doctors away from the primary literature, away from the scientific literature. And they do that in 2 ways. One is they claim authority for themselves. They put on those white coats, and they use endorsements. This agency endorses fluoridation. They give you about 100 agencies that endorse fluoridation. And so we're meant to believe that the overwhelming number of scientists and dentists and doctors, they all endorse fluoridation. So authority, they say, is on their side. But they don't back this up with solid science. And then they also buttress this with reviews. They get their dummy panels, self-selected panels, selected to produce rubber stamp reviews to demonstrate that fluoridations are safe and effective. But the one that got away was the National Research Council. This was the first one where we had a truly balanced panel, and they came back with serious questions which could eventually overthrow fluoridations. But the one half of it is that we are the authority, we have the endorsements. And the other part of their strategy to keep people away is to ridicule the opponents. We are supposed to be junk scientists. We get our information from the internet. We are emotional. We are anything but scientific. Which side is presenting the more solid scientific case, and which side is prepared to go public and defend that case in public and prepared to debate that case in open public debate? And you'll find the answer to those questions. It's the opponents of fluoridation that will go public. It's the opponents of fluoridation who make the science transparent and give all the references, and the opponents who will debate the issue in public. And it's the proponents who will not make the scientific studies available, will not support the studies that haven't been done, make sure that they do get done, who won't go on a public platform and debate this issue with us. In February of 2003, the US EPA invited me to debate the issue in Washington at their annual science fair, which goes on for a week. They always have one controversial issue which is debated. And right away I said, yes, I'll debate anybody. They spent the next 5 weeks trying to find one person from either the ADA or any of the agencies that endorse fluoridation in the United States. They couldn't find one single person with 5 weeks' notice to come to Washington and debate this issue in front of the EPA and the public. Not one, not one. It gives you some idea. The irony, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that they have to do is to come to the public with enormous confidence. I mean, when you're promoting public health, you cannot show any deviation from total confidence. You can't come out it half-hearted. But there's such a gross juxtaposition of this enormous confidence when in a solo platform they promote fluoridation with enormous enthusiasm, and the lack of confidence when it comes to defending their position against someone like myself, and I'm not the only one, on a public platform. I don't think the ethics is complicated. I think the notion of using the public water supply to deliver medication is so preposterous, and denying informed consent to everyone that's not difficult. I think everybody can realize quickly. Ask any pharmacist. Would you ever deliver medication where you couldn't control the dose? No. Would you ever deliver medication and give it to everybody regardless of age, health, or what have you? No. Would you ever give a medication which hasn't been prescribed by a doctor? No. Would you ever give medication that doesn't have a doctor's supervision somewhere to check side effects? No. Would you give medication without the patient's informed consent? No, 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 no. So that, I think, is very straightforward. This is bad medicine, and it's bad ethics. And the AMA is very, very clear about the necessity for getting informed consent when you're giving drugs to people. How many arguments do you need before you say, no, this is not a good idea? We know we've never done it with anything else. We've never used the public water supply to deliver a vitamin, to deliver heart medicine or aspirin or many other things, statins. There are many other things where maybe some doctors would want everybody to get a small dose of these drugs or vitamins, but they've never ever done it with anything but fluoride. Fluoride got in there early, but it never established a precedent for doing it with anything else. And I think that tells you a lot. To demonstrate that a substance is a nutrient, you have to starve the animal or the human being of that nutrient. You have to remove that nutrient from the diet and then demonstrate that some disease happens because the animal's not getting enough of this thing. If you can't demonstrate that, then you're not dealing with an essential nutrient. Fluoride is not needed for any tissue in the body. Instead of this being one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, what it actually is, one of the top 10 public health frauds of the 20th century. And I don't use those words lightly. Let me say it again. Fluoridation is one of the 20th century's top public health frauds. This story could have been written by Kafka or Lewis Carroll or Hans Christian Andersen. The emperor has no clothes, remember? I know we're right, and I'm not prepared to keep quiet when I see an injustice here. And I've also been very inspired by the people that have come before me and the people at the grassroots level that are actively working days and days of their lives, unpaid and often insulted, often digging deep into their own monies. There's a lot of good people working on this, and we're all pretty determined to have justice done and seen to be done. And the last thing that we're prepared to do is to lose this by default. If you want to win this argument with us, then do it in open debate. Do it by answering our scientific questions with scientific answers, with all the references attached. Under those circumstances, if those arguments are stronger than ours and we've been based on wrong science, if we've made mistakes and we're wrong, then I'd be glad to admit it. But we're not going to accept this by default. We're not going to genuflect before pompous names, or names, these big names, or just because they wear a white coat and say they're the president of this or the president of that or the archbishop of this church or what have you. That's not the way science is done. That was the way science was done in Galileo's time, when the Pope told Galileo, get down on your knees and tell me you don't see sunspots when you look through a telescope. You can't do that anymore. Authorities cannot tell scientists what to find. You have to base your science on what you find, on observations, on data, not on political theories or upholding a policy. That's not science. It doesn't make sense to to drink it, to put it inside your body if it works topically. If it works topically, then brush your teeth with toothpaste, fluoridated toothpaste. But don't drink it. Don't expose every tissue in the body, and for that matter, don't expose people that don't want it. It makes as much sense to put fluoride into people's drinking water as it would to swallow sun lotion. You would be laughed out of court if you suggested that. And in the same token, people that suggest putting this known toxic substance that works topically, if at all, into the drinking water, which is inviting systemic exposure to every tissue in the body, that also should be laughed out of court. As I said before, the emperor has no clothes.
Our right to choose is being violated. No one's asking us if we want this stuff in our water. They're just dumping it in. And the last time, I checked, when it comes to medicine, you cannot forcibly medicate me. That has to be something I decide. I have a responsibility as a resident in my city to say, you know what, you're infringing on our rights when it comes to our ability to choose. Communities of color, and whether it be Black and Latino, are more likely to live in areas where they are fluoridated. And also, because of all of the different health problems that Blacks and Latinos have already, regardless of the fluoride, it gets, their health conditions get exacerbated. We're hoping that what will take place is that some of the social workers in the community and those who work with especially teen mothers will make sure that each mother learns and knows that when it comes to your drinking water, it's fluoridated. So that means that you shouldn't allow your child to drink this water. But the problem is these are low-income mothers, and the question becomes, where do they get their unfluoridated or fluoride-free source of water? And it's a very good question, because financially, is it even possible for them? People who hear about this are totally surprised, because they've been raised to believe that fluoride, period, is good for you. It's going to turn out to be the next radium scandal or the next tobacco scandal. And once this hits the fan, I think people are going to be totally demoralized. And I think that's the concern that the EPA, the CDC, and the ADA have, that all of these people who have been trusting them for so many years are just going to give up with all the trust and regulate the crap out of all of the regulators. And it's sad, because that's where we are nationwide. We're regulating the regulators now. That's how bad it's gotten. There are a lot of things that have been touted as benefiting the neediest people, and we found later that it had nothing to do with the neediest people. It just had something to do with profiteering off of someone's weakness or someone's unfortunate position in life. And that's what I think this whole thing with fluoridation is about. It's about manipulating people's heartstrings. If they are really concerned about poor children not getting the dental care that they need and they need access to fluoride, then just donate some money to the city so they can buy tons of toothpaste, and I'm sure we'll be able to pass it all around, So, this has nothing to do with the needy children in city areas.
When I was in dental school, of course, I was taught how wonderful it is. Oh, it's great, it's good. It prevents cavities. Community water fluoridation is the cheapest, most cost-effective way of preventing tooth decay. And I just bought that because what do I know? I'm just a dental student. I expect my professors and teachers to know more than I do. And so I just accepted it. And then I started looking at the chemistry of it and researching more about fluoride. And then it became clear that we've been manipulated. And then the book, if you're familiar with the Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson, that's when I became aware of the history behind the fluoridation of water in this country. What we've been told wasn't true. And then again, you start looking at the studies and thinking about it. The systemic effect of fluoride on your teeth, it just doesn't happen. So when I started, again, putting all of it together and looking at it, it was really clear that we had been misinformed. And the problem with it over fluoride is that the dentists themselves have been so indoctrinated that so oftentimes they reply or retort with some sort of dogma. Frankly, I think most of the dentists have not educated themselves on this issue thoroughly enough. I think what you tend to see is everybody getting up and they're just parroting and saying what they've been told with very little thought or examination. And so it must be good because all these other people say it's good. Well, look at the science, look at the chemistry, see if it makes sense. Some people have called it a protected poison, and the reason for that, I believe, is that manufacturing, quite frankly, needs it to produce and make a lot of things. The trouble is they come up with a toxic waste and they have to get rid of it. How nice to be able to sell your garbage to communities and put it in the water. Why are all these brave and courageous people, standing up to this Goliath and saying no more? It's because the truth is what it is. I think that the body of evidence claiming fluoride is bad is generally summarily dismissed by the bulk of the profession as just BS or, bad information, bad source. No point in looking at that. We already know the truth, dogma, dogma, dogma. My belief is if the dentists themselves really started looking at the information independently, they might be a little unhappy with organized dentistry. At one time I thought that I could bring this problem up through the system, at least get my colleagues to look at it, and I got shut down, and so that told me that, supposedly there's a way, it seems to me there should be a way for a member to bring up something that's not working, and the group of us should sit down and examine it. But that just doesn't happen. So I think the only way things are going to change is if pressure comes from outside the profession, by citizens and other organizations, other dentists who know the truth. It's really sad that we can't clean it up ourselves, but again, I think that's because if all of this were to change, it's going to influence the income stream for a lot of people. That puts a lot of pressure on continuing to do things the way we do them. So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure there. The substance they want to put in, or typically put in, hydrofluorosilicic acid, has lead and arsenic in it too. So you're going to add more lead to the water that's there. And in addition, the chemistry of fluoride is such that it pulls lead out of the pipes. So here you have a situation where fluoride's pulling more lead out of the pipes, so it's releasing lead to the community. Well, in this community, I think I'm the only dentist that's anti-fluoride. I'm the only one who's willing to be vocal about it. There may be others that secretly believe that, but they're not willing to come out of the closet. So I'd say it's very much a minority. I've had discussions with my classmates at times from dental school, and at first there was general disbelief that it could even be true, but now at least one of my classmates is willing to acknowledge that, gee, maybe what you have to share could be right, because I've examined health and nutrition with Dr. McDougall, and he says the same thing about nutrition and physicians. So maybe you are right, but I think that you take a position like I do, and it puts you at a lot of risk. And I don't think most dentists are willing to do that. I don't even want to be in that position. The problem is that I've been raised also to do the right thing, and a belief that that most people want to do the right thing. I find this appalling that we're in the position we are. It's just unbelievable. Well, you're killing a sacred cow. I mean, fluoride's good. Fluoride's good. You know, fluoride's good. And for you to say otherwise, are you crazy? Fluoride's good. You know, it's dogma, dogma, dogma. I mean, how can you think otherwise? We've been taught it's good. You know, you're just one of those quacks, those crackpots. Matter of fact, my cousin gave me some anti-fluoride literature to me, a few years before I went to this conference, and he said, listen, I don't know anything about this. I've got people that are telling me fluoride's not good, and you say it's good. Read this stuff. So he handed me this stuff. I read it, and I said, this is garbage. It's good. Fluoride's good. I mean, I used to believe that too, until I got to look at the science. And you look at the science, and it's indisputable. It's bad. And you know, it's maybe a minority position, but it's the truth. You know, fluoride is bad. It's not a topic that most dentists sit around and talk about anyway. It only comes up at, you know, city council meeting type things. And I know, you know, it was really hard the other night at the city council meeting, because I gotta tell you, several of the dentists that got up there are acquaintances and old friends of mine, and I'm sure that they find it very discouraging for an old friend, former board member, to get up there and shame them on what they're doing. I hate to be in that position. I mean, there are other people that have reversed their positions too, because they have the wherewithal and the guts to examine the literature and say, you know, maybe we're wrong about this. Maybe this is true. And when you start to see the studies and you do the work, you go, whoa, this is wrong. But then, you know, most dentists are just not doing that. It just isn't happening. When I first came to Santa Cruz, I was definitely pro-fluoride, and I was amazed that the patients here didn't want fluoride. I could not believe that. What do you mean you don't want fluoride? It's good stuff. And so I met resistance from patients right away, which began to sort of tweak me. When I worked in Los Angeles, you know, you'd tell somebody, you need fluoride, you need this, you need that. Okay, doctor, thank you very much. Not here. This community questions authority. And I think that's what it takes. I was very surprised that patients didn't want it. I couldn't believe it. You mean you don't want fluoride? Wow. So, you know, a lot of patients we wouldn't do fluoride for. And, but, you know, it was that attitude that caused me to wonder if I was doing things right. And, you know, as you start looking at it, the patients themselves oftentimes bring the education to the dentist. And they have to be brave and willing enough to do that, because the dentists are certainly not going to get the education through their own professional organizations. So I think if patients persist in bringing this up over and over and over, perhaps we'll reach critical mass and get what we need to have happen. I know that we're really harming people, and I also know that my colleagues are very well intentioned, and then they've been misled. And it's like having, you know, the lone voice in the forest. And, you know, I don't question, you know, I don't question that what I'm doing is right or wrong. I know what, you know, I know that what we're doing is right, that this is a bad thing. And it's just, it's beyond me that intelligent people wouldn't sit down and really take a thoughtful look at this. You know, that's what I have trouble with. You know, people who do what I do, they're looking for the truth. You know, and it's about the truth. I mean, this is insane. This is craziness. It really is. You know, putting this chemical in the water. I mean, even if we could accept it worked, why do we have to put everybody else at risk? When you go and you look at the history about this information's been known for 60, 70 years. It's been repressed, and people, good people, have lost their jobs and their careers just by doing the right thing. This fluoride controversy has been going on from the get-go. And people were voicing the same concerns 50 years ago that they're bringing up today. This isn't new. And the same old. It's just that the people who want to push this through have just gotten more clever at shoving things through on a legislative basis, and continue to provide more disinformation. Have I ever debated anybody who was pro-fluoride? No. You know why? They refuse to show up. That's how they deal with it. They don't show up. They can't debate it. You're not ever going to get anybody in the same room with David Kennedy to debate fluoride. I'll tell you that right now. He's a walking encyclopedia, and he knows his stuff and won't be intimidated. But no, you know, they don't show up. We've invited them time and time again to be on the radio or have a forum. No one shows up.
I got involved in fluoridation because as an instructor and a professor and a teaching master in the water treatment training business, I had a student come to me and say, "You didn't have the right information. You should take a look at some of the new information." I was just flabbergasted, and I wondered how many people in the water treatment industry knew how they had been hoodwinked. So when I started to speak to operators in the last 7 years, I started to tell them about these hazards and the problems with their systems. And this was echoed in stories told back to me by the operators. And a lot of operators came to me clandestinely and said, "You know, I also have observed health effects because I've been handling the concentrated form of these chemicals. I have problems with arthritis-like symptoms. I can't work in fluoride rooms because when I do, there's a sensitization and I have to be removed." And I felt that treatment plant operators as a whole weren't being represented. Nobody was listening to them. So I started to survey them, and I found out that overwhelmingly, once they found out the truth about the hazards of the substance they were dealing with, and the fact that it really doesn't do what it's supposed to do, that is dental decay prevention when ingested, many of them questioned whether or not we should be putting that substance in the water. In fact, emphatically, most of them said, "Let's get it out." Every time I speak at a public hearing, I'm not seen as some nut job. I'm seen as somebody who teaches their plant employees, the guy who their people get instruction from, and those are the same people in their communities that they rely on to provide safe drinking water. So there's a bit of credibility when I speak, but more importantly, there's awe when they find out the truth of what's going in the drinking water. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, the chemical waste product from the phosphate fertilizer industry. This is a substance that simply goes from a processing plant into a tanker truck and is delivered to a water treatment plant in my community. And my counselors at the time were astonished that this product could even exist. And when they asked their own municipal engineers whether this was so, those engineers confirmed the fact, believing that the substance that's going in the water is somehow a pharmaceutical grade or some well-prepared, purified extract is completely false. This stuff comes filled with heavy metals. I have one certificate of analysis that shows upwards of 34 parts per million of lead in the shipment that was delivered to a municipality, not mine, but just down the road. And lead is a prohibited substance in the province of Ontario from being added to drinking water. It doesn't matter that it gets diluted 180,000 times in the process. Who would stand at the top of a water tower and deliberately add lead, a known human carcinogen, to the drinking water? And if I had done that, even as a certified operator, I would have been arrested immediately. There was no difference except the argument of dilution. I had spent, 25 years teaching students at the point I was enlightened. And my training was that fluoride was a compound simply added to the water for tooth decay prevention. This was the common thought. The problem with that is all of the books that were used to educate operators on drinking water treatment processes all said the same thing, and it was as if they came from some sort of scripted source. In 1995, I wondered that perhaps we should have more fluoridation throughout the province, and I began a exploration of the possibility of providing courses to teach operators how to fluoridate the water. Now it seems incongruous, but at the time it was something I was exploring. And I was one of the few CDC trained water engineers who have been able to provide CDC related training to operators about how to fluoridate drinking water supplies. So I wasn't speaking from a point of wilderness. I was speaking from a point of authority with the CDC information fully indoctrinated into my being, going out talking to my students, which were the treatment plant operators. People tended to trust the expert. And the problem with trusting the expert is that if the expert makes a mistake, those people end up having a mistaken belief. And that's exactly what happened. I used my CDC training to advocate for fluoridation, only to find out from one of my students that I was all washed up. And more importantly, that student was graceful enough to tell me that I was full of crap. And better than that, I realized that perhaps I didn't have everything that I should have had in my armory of information to teach, that I had to go back and learn more. And when I did, I found out I was wrong. And there's nothing wrong with being wrong. The greater wrong is not correcting it. And that's what I'm doing now, and that's why I speak out about this. Like everything else, when you find out a truth that's unsettling, I was deeply embarrassed about the crime I had committed, an educational crime I had committed for the previous 20 or so thousand students who had heard that fluoridation was fine. And there's a deep-seated feeling to undo that piece of information in the minds of those individuals. If I could go back in time and extract that chunk of information from their mind and replace it with what I know now, I would feel much better. Fluoridation tends to be a belief system. And in order to have a belief system, you have to have a creed and you have to have faith. And the creed has been established by the simple words of safe and effective. The faith is established by trust us, we're the professionals, we're the doctors, we're the health professionals, we know better. The reality is, once you start to pick away at the basis for the creed, suddenly the faith is eroded. And I suppose my job is to change the creed to the point where the faith's eroded enough that people will abandon the faith, and it'll be one of those faith systems that dissolves away into history. I think water fluoridation's days are numbered. This practice is really a post-World War II practice. The practice of using asbestos, the practice of thalidomide, the practice of leaded gasoline, the practice of numerous other chemical experiments that came from rapid chemical growth. People accepted these modern technochemical developments on faith, without question. My argument with fluoridation in dentists is this. First of all, no dental authority that I've ever met is qualified to speak about water quality. And when we're talking about putting hydrofluorosilicic acid as an ingested fluoride product into our bodies through the stomach with a faint hope that it's going to do something through the saliva on the surface of the teeth without affecting any other parts of the body. This is just wishful thinking. So I have said publicly that if you show me a dentist who's qualified beyond what lies in the human body between the chin and the nose, I'll be glad to listen to them about water quality. But until that point in time, I'm not going to take my direction from dental authorities or dental trade associations or the dental unions about water fluoridation. When they step into the realm of water quality, they're in my world, and they're not qualified to talk about it. 99.5% of all of the fluoride that gets put in with the purported use of treating teeth passes right through into the wastewater stream and back out into the receiving environment. The main component of hydrofluorosilicic acid is water, 75%. The other component, the 25%, is the actual hydrofluorosilicic acid active ingredient. However, there are small percentages also of hydrogen fluoride and heavy metals, and the heavy metals include primarily lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and the more alarming thing for me are amounts of radionuclides, which are radioactive components that are scrubbed out of the stack gases. The entire treatment process is done before hydrofluorosilicic acid gets added, and then we deliberately degrade it with this stuff. And when we degrade the water quality, we are not delivering the best water quality that we are capable of. We're delivering it at some standard that's less. And I believe that my neighbors, my family, my friends, all deserve the best water quality that the technology that we can afford. And hydrofluorosilicic acid just goes the wrong way. The problem with this stuff is that we can't dispose of it on the land. We can't dispose of it readily into a receiving stream. So the only other alternative is to find a alternative use for it as a product, or treat the waste on site to neutralize its effect. Well, the treatment of the waste is expensive. It's far more profitable to take it out and truck it around the country and discharge it through the water treatment plants into the water systems, through people's guts, and ultimately back to the water systems, because all of the wastewater that is in the community gets washed down the pipes through the sewage plants and then out into the receiving streams and lakes. If I had the same tanker truck that rolled across the border into Canada from a fluoride phosphate plant in Florida, discharge into the Niagara River its entire load, there would be an environmental disaster. There would be a hue and cry for the driver, the discharger, the owner of the product, the producer, etc. But to do it inside a treatment plant is perfectly legal. So we're creating a situation where we're just going to poison everybody slowly because some industry doesn't want to treat its waste.
I'm John Martinelli, president of S. Martinelli & Company. When I basically went public with my opposition to Watsonville's plans to fluoridate the municipal water supply, we received quite a bit of feedback from our consumers. I would say about 90% of the people that we heard from were supportive of our position in opposition to fluoride. But we're also saying, you know, if you have fluoridated water in your product, we're not going to be able to buy it anymore. And they're very, very concerned for all of the health reasons that we should not have fluoride in our product. And so it's been very difficult to overcome the perception that the consumer has that if Watsonville fluoridates, that Martinelli's apple juice is going to have fluoride in it. And that is absolutely not the case. We don't have any water in our apple juice products. However, we have a whole line of products that we've introduced just in this last year that have water as a primary ingredient. Those products really represent a lot of our growth opportunity. And one of the things that I didn't have a chance last night to make the point with the city council because they cut me off and didn't give me enough time to talk. But one of the points that I wanted to make was a lot of our growth opportunity is with these sparkling lemonades. And we're trying very hard to grow our business in this community and employ local people. We want to grow our business and we want to grow it in Watsonville, but I can't do it by putting fluoridated water in our new product lines. We're absolutely not going to use fluoridated water in any of our products or our process. And so we're going to dig a well, and there's an aquifer that's 600 feet down called the Aromas Red Sands Aquifer, and it is pure as the driven snow. And it's been tested, but it happens to be the same aquifer that the city of Watsonville is tapped into for our municipal water supply. We're going to have our own well, and we are going to put that water in our lemonade products and use it in our process, and it will have 0 fluoride in it. So it's going to be expensive and time consuming and something that I wouldn't otherwise have to do if they weren't going ahead with this fluoridation effort. Just as a concerned member of the community, I've had people come up to me after those meetings saying, John, even if you get your own well and you solve your own problem, please don't abandon us because, we need your support and we need help making sure that this doesn't happen just for the people. And I really believe that unfortunately I've been thrust into a role where I've become a spokesman for this. It's not something that I relish. It's not something that I want to do. It's not attention that I want to bring to our company because some people really react negatively. But unfortunately, because I do have the opportunity to stand up and speak about it, I find that I'm kind of obligated and compelled to do it because I believe that fluoridating the municipal water supply is just the wrong thing to do. January 2010, we received notice, and I'm going to say it was less than a week, that the council had a contract and they were ready to sign it at the next council meeting. And we were all stunned because literally years and years had gone by with apparently no action, no activity, and had no idea that Mayor Alejo was pushing this agenda of his along. And so we had to scramble. It's my understanding that the state law, the state mandate that requires that communities fluoridate if they have 10,000 water hookups and funding is offered by another source other than the local community, that law trumps our local ordinance, which was Measure S, was voted on and passed. The will of the people was to not have fluoridated water, and that should be honored. So we are just shocked and appalled that our state government believes that they know more than we do and that they can impose their will and force fluoridation on a community that doesn't want it. My grandfather was the first one in this community to oppose fluoridation back in the 50s. And that's why, during the meeting last night, they kept talking about, oh, we've been doing this for 10 years. Heck no, it's been over 50 years. And my grandfather funded the first campaign, and there was a vote of the people, and the will of the people was to not fluoridate. That happened back then. Then there was another one with Measure S. My dad was a major funder, majorly funded that campaign. And wrote a lot of the documentation, the ads that we ran in the papers and whatnot, and we were successful again at. In fact, that was the third time that the community had voted against fluoridation over that 50-year period. Personally, I've been aware of it as long as I've been on Earth because my family's been fighting fluoridation mostly for moral reasons, not so much as they relate to our business. That's come along more recently because of our new lemonade products where water is an ingredient. We have been fighting fluoridation because we believe it's mass medication and it's immoral for the government to do that. I've been raised with that. I believe it. I've also done my own research and have come to the same conclusions that my father and my grandfather have in their opposition to fluoride. And I agree with them. I think that there's even more evidence now than we had back then to suggest that it's really not worth the risk. I really believe that it's the wrong thing to do, and that our government is overstepping its bounds by forcing this product, this medication, on the community. So many of these public health professionals are obligated to carry that torch, and it's part of their sort of mandate that we're going to support fluoridation, the public policy of fluoridation, and no matter what. And so even though individually, I don't believe they all really think that fluoridation works or that it necessarily doesn't have harmful effects, but they carry that torch because they have to. And it's really unfortunate that they use their position as health professionals, even though they don't have personal knowledge necessarily about the ills of fluoridation.
When it comes to water fluoridation, I was completely blindsided. When 2 citizens and 1 counselor came to me in my hometown and asked me to help remove fluoridation from our municipal drinking water, I had no opinion, I had no bias, but I did remember thinking to myself, how tough could this be? I worked on some very difficult social activist issues in the past. I was burnt out. I wasn't looking for any other issues. And I made the mistake of believing water fluoridation would be an easy issue to deal with if we simply talked about the science. What I've come to learn is that of all of the issues I've ever volunteered to work on and committed my time to, water fluoridation is the most difficult, bizarre, Orwellian issue I have ever had to deal with. The pushback to suppress the truth is like nothing I have ever experienced before. One would think when investigating water fluoridation, we would only need to look at science. After all, we're not trying to affix blame. We're not trying to gain something from pointing up a mistake in the past. We're simply trying to make a good decision going forward. If we're talking about a scientific issue and health, and maybe even health benefit, why on earth would we not want to address science square on? Unless, of course, people are afraid the science is going to be too damning and too crushing to policy already in place. Why are we putting the cheapest industrial toxic waste into our drinking water if we really care about the health and well-being of our children and our children's oral health? Is it reasonable to have lead contaminants in hydrofluorosilicic acid? Why would we want to trade off our children's brains for healthy teeth? I mean, let's look at the real issues here. Let's look at the trade-offs that are before us and decide what makes sense. And to me, I think when people see the trade-offs and fully realize what's being used to fluoridate their water, it'll become obvious. We have dental lobby groups that have been bombarding us to say, trust us, we know what we're doing. Well, in our community, they've had 66 years to prove to us they know what they're doing, and they haven't offered up much science, and they haven't provided it when asked. The dentists clearly are not qualified to comment on systemic ingestion of anything. I think we're going to have to go to the experts on systemic ingestion, on toxicology, on the combinatory effects of various chemicals in water, and those experts will have the relevant facts and the relevant truth about those concerns which we're being asked to trade off against possible reduction of dental caries, which has yet to be demonstrated causally or conclusively at this period in time, 6 decades into water fluoridation. What we observe when we present proponents of fluoridation with science that calls into question the efficacy or even the safety of fluoridation is almost an immediate and overt denial that that science has any quality, even without picking it up and reading it. Running from science has nothing to do with finding truth. One has to wonder, why run from something if your science is so solid? Why turn a blind eye when sometimes your science doesn't bear out what you thought it should? It's always interesting to observe when promoters of fluoridation say, we introduced fluoride into the drinking water and dental caries rates went down, and it's because of the fluoride. And then you say, well, what about where fluoride was introduced into the drinking water and dental caries rates didn't go down? In fact, maybe they even went up. Well, there's something wrong with that study because fluoride was in the water. That's not a sound or fair way of assessing science when you throw out data that doesn't bear out the results you're hoping for. It's helpful when considering water fluoridation to also consider the precautionary principle. That principle being, if in doubt, don't do it. If in doubt, leave it out. For those who say we should continue to fluoridate our water on the chance that it might be reducing dental caries, in my mind, the precautionary principle would say consuming the co-contaminants arsenic, lead, mercury, radionuclides offers a perfect opportunity to consider the precautionary principle. Perhaps we should stop consuming those things bundled with hydrofluorosilicic acid and its silicofluorides until such times as we have overwhelming evidence that there's any benefit. When one reviews the history of water fluoridation, it's quite interesting how the architects of the marketing of water fluoridation conducted themselves. Instead of putting science out front to sell water fluoridation to the public and convince the public that it's warranted, in fact, what happened was a belief system was constructed. Edward L. Bernays, who was hired to market water fluoridation by the polluting industries, was very clear in his statement when he said, we know we cannot talk about the science behind water fluoridation. So what we must do is we must find white coats to promote water fluoridation. And once we have those white coats promoting water fluoridation, whenever anyone wants to talk about the science, we'll simply point to those white coats and say, well, if it isn't good for you, why would they say it is? That's not a discussion about science. That becomes marketing. And it's a very smart thing to do because we all know that it's much more difficult to deconstruct a well-placed, well-lived belief system that's entrenched for many decades. However, it's much easier to have a rational debate where science trumps science until we get to the truth. Yes, there's good science and there's bad science, but we're quite capable today to evaluate science on its quality and its merits, and we need only do that to deconstruct water fluoridation. The problem is the belief system has been entrenched in the public's mind for more than 60 years. So when one wants to add fact into a belief system that does not dovetail neatly and comfortably into that belief system, the human response is to reject the fact rather than realign the belief system. In psychological terms, that's called cognitive dissonance. We simply can't package something that doesn't sit well for us, makes us feel too uncomfortable, and may keep us up at night, because after all, it would be very nice to go to bed thinking and believing. There are others out there, the dental associations, public health, Health Canada, who are looking after our well-being while I'm sleeping tonight. But to believe that perhaps they've made a gross error and are now not willingly going to admit that doesn't sit well. So it was very, very smart to work with belief systems and construct belief systems because they're very difficult to deconstruct, as I've said. And what we have to do is be willing to set aside biases and sit down at a table as friends and neighbors and discuss the science. Some people who say the science is too difficult to understand, then let's bring in people from both sides of the issue, proponents and opponents of water fluoridation, who are qualified to comment on the science, on the chemistry, on the systemic ingestion, on the biology, on the physiology, on the statistics, on the methodology. They can help us understand what is good science and what is bad science. And from there, we can make the decision based on the science in front of us, whether it's worth the risk. To me, that's the fairest resolve to deconstructing what I believe to be a myth that has been carefully constructed over 6.5 decades. People sometimes will also ask, why would somebody purposely want to harm us? I don't necessarily think anybody purposely wants to harm us, but I do think if somebody's whole reputation as an industry and as an institution, for example, dentistry and dental associations, is built and predicated upon endorsements, first and foremost, look, Mom, I have no cavities, fluoride. If that were found out to have been an oversight or a mistake, it would absolutely shatter the institution's credibility going forward for any future endorsements. That's got to be very frightful for an industry, and I understand that. But an industry's reputation cannot be set in front of public's health and well-being. Public health, unfortunately, falls into the same dilemma. If public health is found to be misguided all these decades simply because they relied on the opinions and the endorsements and the name dropping which permeates the fluoridation story and seems to be used to trump hard science, if they simply have depended on others and people find out that public health isn't actually firsthand vigilant, doesn't actually do research themselves, and in fact doesn't even have and understand much research when we ask them for it, those institutions fall, people panic. Those institutions fall, people question when, if ever, do we trust those institutions again. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance revolving around the fluoridation issue. And I don't think people know quite what to do. I think they would like to come clean. I think they would like to have a reprieve, have a meeting of the minds where we can simply say, all right, let's try it and see what happens. Let's turn it off and let's look very closely. After all, if it is, as you say, one of the 10 most successful disease treatments of the 20th century, then it does warrant a few dollars of conscientious research. We've turned it on. We did what you said. You said you were doing research. You haven't. Nothing of import, nothing of conclusivity that it has merit. Let's turn it off. Let's spend a few dollars. Let's do some significant research and see if dental caries rates do rocket, do go off the scales, do rise to new heights. If they do, the dentists were right. If they don't, there's no reason we should be continuing with this practice any longer, especially with the health harms that we're starting to see associated with it. When it comes to the future of water fluoridation, I'm quite sure that water fluoridation practice will certainly meet its end, and a well-deserved end. That's not to say it may come soon. It might. But I am sure it will come eventually. If scientists were allowed to do unfettered research, publish for peer review, and would not suffer rebuke if their science happens to generate something less than positive in regards to water fluoridation, the public would be better served. As it stands right now, most scientists who are not finding positive result to water fluoridation are ostracized and outed and segregated from their scientific community. Oppression should have nothing to do with good scientific research. If someone's research happens to show something that the pro-fluoridationists don't find favorable, it should be looked at. It should not be ignored. It should not be refused publication. The scientist should not be outed or refused tenure. It should be looked at as pure science. People who are wanting to discuss water fluoridation are often met with elected officials running in the other direction, and they're often perplexed by that. But if you think about it for a moment, by and large, because water fluoridation is born on a belief system rather than science, you have on average about half the population that swings one way and the other half swings another way when it comes to whether we should or shouldn't fluoridate. Elected officials are very aware of that. If they are to take a stand on water fluoridation, it means they are to effectively divide their potential electorate in half. Elected officials aren't scientists. Many of us have been looking at this for years. We have a 20-minute meeting with them, and we expect them to get their head around it in 20 minutes. They can't. It's overwhelming. From what I see at this juncture in my 4.5 years of fighting fluoridation, the science is increasingly more solid about the health harms. However, it's being totally denied by the promoters of water fluoridation. Unfortunately for myself and my family, I'm a full-time activist on the water fluoridation issue. I don't know how long I'll be able to sustain that, but I'll do it for as long as I can, or until the issue resolves itself. I would love for this battle to end. I would love to be able to pack up and go home, to go back to my family, to go back to my business, to go back to earning an income. I really hope that day comes soon. But if it does not, I have to persist because it is the right thing to do. I believe this is wrong. I believe it's harming people. I believe people aren't being told the truth. I believe the science is being suppressed. If I were to do nothing to try to change that, I'm no better than the people who are perpetrating that.
I've known about fluoride for years and years, but since it was never in my water, I didn't do much about it or think about it much. But they've put it in my water now. Now I'm activated to do something to get it out, this fluoride. It's poison. The newspaper will not publish one word about it where I am. So I've concluded the only thing I can do is one-on-one. So for instance, I always carry a couple of copies of the newly released DVD called Professional Perspectives on Fluoride. I carry a couple of those around in my purse. So I'll be in a restaurant and I'll be, the server's coming and she'll say, "Do you want water?" And I'll say, "Well, is it fluoridated?" And usually they have no idea, what, huh? So then I tell them, "Don't you know anything about fluoride in the water? That it's really bad for you?" "Well, I thought it was good for the teeth." They'll go like that, see? So eventually I get around to asking them if they would mind if I made them a present of this DVD I happen to have here. And they'll take it, and in good humor. So that's one way I do it. Another, I'll meet friends. And one friend I met, "You're not always welcome this way." She says, "Oh, you're on a crusade." And so what could I do? She walked away. So I wrote to her and I said, "Yes, I'm on a crusade. That's how important this is." The other way is I just decided I would go to the top. I've written to the president, I've written to the governors, different governors, I've written to my own governor, I've written to vice presidents and the executive editors. I try to go to the top thinking that it's no use going to anybody lower down. They're only obeying orders. Now it looks to me like even those at the top are only obeying orders because they never reply, or when they do, they always say the same thing. "Well, it's been proven over time that it's very good for children's teeth. It's safe and effective, safe and effective." Same form. So you never get a decent reply from any executive ever. The most important thing I can do is spend my time. I write letters. That's about the only thing I can do. I'm not a scientist. I can't do any research. I can talk about research, but there's even a limit to that, because since I'm not a scientist, I may misquote, you know, that sort of thing. You get to be a pest, and it can get to you if you take it personally, but I don't care. What I'm trying to do is more important than whether they think I'm a pest. So if I think I've gone that far with them, well, I just leave them alone for a while, you know. But it's important to follow up to see if they actually watched the DVD. Because sometimes they say they have, and if you kind of question them a little bit, you find out they haven't. When you first approach a person about fluoride and they don't know anything about it, what they usually say is, well, it's good for the teeth. They think it's good for the teeth. So then you have to counteract that. And that's when I offer to give them the DVD, where I'll say, you'll find out here that there are all these famous, well-respected scientists around the world who explain why they think it's a bad idea to put it in the water. And that's the way I approach that. I almost never find anybody who says, oh yeah, I know it's really bad. Never, not where I live. So it's always an uphill thing. However, I gave it to my dentist, and he listened to it, and what did he do? He called my water department, and they hooked him up with one of the engineers. And what did the engineer say? He said, this stuff is poison. Nobody should ever drink it. When he gave me that message, I was real happy. Then I, just by chance, got a brochure from another local dentist, a very nice brochure, explaining his program and how he considered his attitude toward his work as very forward-looking. And I don't know why I decided to do it, but I said, oh, well, he gave his email, I'll email him. And I said, you say you're a forward-looking dentist. I said, what's your attitude about fluoride? Well, he wrote back. Now, most dentists will not touch you. They won't answer or anything. The essence was I offered to send him a DVD. And with the DVD, I would always send a little extra stuff, you know. And when I sent that, he again wrote back and gave me a marvelous quote from Tolstoy, which explained that when a person has a belief like that, like the dentists do, even though there's lots of evidence that it's not correct, it's in their, he calls it, they weave it into the fabric of their lives, and they can't let go of it because they've been teaching it all their lives. They've been talking about it to their friends all their lives. And he's talking about educated people like dentists who believe that. And it's part of the fabric of their lives, and they won't give it up. Now, he sent that back to me, which was really, really unusual. But he's obviously an unusual guy. So those are two dentists who got educated, were not afraid to read the material and get educated. The thing that bothers me the most about fluoride is that they don't ask my permission. You can't go out in your neighborhood and have coffee without knowing that that coffee has got fluoridated water in it. So your whole life is upset. You can't do that. You can't grow an organic garden in your backyard anymore because you're sprinkling it with the hose, and that's fluoridated water. You can't filter it out unless you are well-to-do enough to buy reverse osmosis equipment or distillation. because the carbon filters do not, this stuff is so soluble that it just goes right through anything. Carbon filters don't touch it. So if you can't afford reverse osmosis, then you can't have all your water fluoridated. You could buy a small one that'll do your kitchen, you know. But then why should I pay the water department? I pay my bills and they deliver the water, but I can't use it. I have to spend extra. It's very hard to get the dentist to change the way they think. There are, once in a while, ones who do, and then that's what keeps you going.
My name is Bill Patnod. I live in Methuen, Massachusetts, and I've lived there most of my life except for service. The first time they wanted to fluoridate, Dr. Zanfagner, an allergist, wrote this book, Truth Decay. And he was the leader from that time on. And this guy was ostracized, he was put down, belittled by his professionals and other people. I went to the reference librarian and I asked her for information on fluoride, pro and con. I knew the pro, but I wasn't sure about the con. And I found out that after an hour that this was ridiculous. From the information that the librarian, the research librarian gave me, I said, this can't be. I found it so quick and it's so ridiculous. So anyways, I searched some more and I got a name of Dr. Phyllis Mullenix. So what happened is I just took my map out and I went directly to her house with the paper. They want to fluoridate Methuen, Mass. And I knocked on her door and said, geez, Doc, I'm here about this. She said, come on in. She's from Missouri, and what a nice lady. My head spun with all the information she had. And we brought other people to meet her from Methuen, and then hence the fight began with the remainder of Dr. Zanfagner's group and new people who were fighting against it. And we beat it in 96 by 497, because it was beginning in 96, by 400 votes. And in, again, 2002, they brought it up, we beat it by 2,000 votes. People just, you know, came up and they just listened. I mean, sure, there was those diehards, fluoride's wonderful, this and that. But, you know, to beat them by 2,000 votes when they were pushing it in their dental office, even the hospital that was in Methuen was pushing it and had signs out for it. And we still beat it because the people listened. And that was the best thing. It's like a mission. It's like when you find out how bad it is, you just can't turn away. Every time I see a mother pushing a baby carrier, I say, how can I let that kid down? I can't. And we just can't do it. We were talking one day, and someone made a joke of it. What if social scientists said, hey, let's save all the marriages in the world and put aspirin and Viagra in the water? I mean, it's ridiculous. Question authority. You can read, you can write, you can process information. You went through the school systems. Don't let anybody tell you they're the authority and they know best. Well, I tell everybody every day. I hate to say it, but I nearly got in a fight, a few fights in a bar talking about fluoride. I guess I talked to one guy had one too many. But let me tell you, I mean, it's sort of risky. It's sort of risky, you know? You got to go up there and say you got to be strong, and you got to listen to the person on the other side you're trying to convince too. I put up a sign. It's a professional sign, 2 of them. I held one coming, going during commuting. We had one posted in the center of the town. Fluoride's toxic. $2,000 to a charity if you prove otherwise. My name, my number, a website. And guess what? Not one dentist, one lawyer, one doctor, one pediatrician. Nobody called except my state senator, and said, Bill, I tried to collect it, I couldn't. I said, Steve, of course not. I think I'm giving away $2,000. I just want to get people's attention. Could have been $1 million. It wouldn't have made a difference. It's toxic. Oh boy, what keeps me going? It's just from the heart. It's how the spirit moves me, how we care about people, how I feel about myself. I have to look in the mirror and face myself and say, am I doing the right thing? Am I being ethical and moral? Am I helping my community out? Am I the type of person I really want to be? So each day I go out, hand things to people, talk to people, and let them know. Oh yeah, sometimes you get down and you get upset, but gee, you know, if you give up, you're done. So There's no profit in giving up. I was telling people about it, and they said, Billy, you're really getting into this thing, you know? So I try to tell jokes and keep it light and mention it. And now my friends even joke back at me about fluoride, and they believe, but it took a while. I mean, they're good and open people, but it takes a while because of the 50 years that it was pushed. And of course the authority, the dentists with the white jackets, of course they know better than we do. But we know that doctors make mistakes, and we really believe they've been lied to. And the propaganda it's pressure on them to produce what the ADA wants them to say. And you know, I feel bad for them, but at the same time, we have to take them on and head on and tell them how we really feel. I feel a responsibility to the people of Methuen and the surrounding areas to let them know what I know about fluoride. I got to know a lot of people that way. In fact, just walking in a restaurant the other day, I didn't know who the guy was, and he says, I know you. You're the guy against fluoride. And I said, yeah, and in fact, I'm going to a conference next weekend to learn more about it. And he was sort of shocked. Even my mechanic, when I dropped my car off before I came here, I said, yeah, Bob, you got to get this ready and, you know, fix everything you can because I'm going up to upstate New York on a fluoride conference. He said, you are? I says, yeah, you still fight? Absolutely. So when people hear that, I think he even gave me a break on my bill. When people hear that you're still out there fighting, they tell other people. And, you know, and they believe you. It's more valid that you're continuing the fight. We have one dentist in Methuen, I know this from talking to mothers passing out flyers, that he recommends not giving their kids fluoride. And that was so good to hear, but he will not come out against it, like, publicly. Well, from what we hear at these meetings and from dentists is that the ADA is really monitoring dentists who fight against this. And they put a lot of pressure on them to change their mind. You know, to save face, you know, I can't say why a professional organization who's supposed to have our health in the best interest wouldn't look into this when even dentists in their own ranks are telling people not to fluoridate. Why wouldn't they take a step back and say, well, let's look at this. Why would they have such a hard line on this, rigid line, that they don't want to hear anything, they know better, when even people in their profession are backing away from it. I don't know if money's involved, power is involved, control's involved, saving face is involved, but whatever the reason is, it is wrong. A lot more fighting. A lot more fighting. A lot more money being spent, a lot more confrontations, but I think we are going to win. But the only way we can win is if the people listening to this will take the time to look at the issue, look at the freedom of choice, look at the science, and decide. They have to take control of their life, their children's lives, and do the right thing for them, for their own health and their family's health. Don't just kowtow to professionals and authority. Check it out. Like I said before, you learned how to read and write, you learned how to process information. Trust yourself. Trust yourself and challenge these people. Like I told one of my councilmen, I said, you know, you're giving your kids these fluoride pills. These are toxic. Ask your pediatrician. A month or so later, he came back, Bill, I asked my pediatrician about the toxicity of these pills I'm giving my kid. And she said, well, give it to your kid every other day, not every day. I mean, what is going on here? So he said, that's it. My kid's not taking any of that. I mean, it's incredible. It just is. He just asked the question. And that was his answer. And right away he said, that's it. So you have victories. You have victories. You got to fight for them, but you have victories. And you can wake up every morning, look in the mirror and say, hey, or before you go to bed, you look in the mirror and say, hey, I did something good today. And you just feel good within yourself and your heart. Well, if you just read the warning label on your toothpaste, boy, that's a persuader. Once you read it, it should just make you angry about not knowing about how bad fluoride is. If you swallow more than a recommended amount, which is pea size, you have to call poison control. Where's informed consent on this? Where's informed consent when your child is sitting down getting a fluoride treatment? If they swallow it, they can get sick or die. They don't tell people about this. You know, dentists are professionals, and they go to school and they're trained. You only know what you're taught and what you're trained and what you're given, and within the curriculum that you're taking. So if the propaganda is there about fluoride, well, they're going to, you know, definitely push it. Well, yeah, they say put it in the water because people aren't responsible enough to brush their teeth, or you know, the poor people don't have like maybe good oral health habits. You know, the thing is that they can treat those people with about the same amount of money that we would put into the water fluoridation of your city or town. They could send the dentist. They could have dentists go to schools and work on these kids. You know, there are other options to that. Of course, people need to know how to brush their teeth, floss their teeth, and they have to eat correctly, you know, good nutrition. And that should be checked at school with the nurse to help those individuals out and those families out. You can give them toothpaste. There's a lot of things you can do than fluoridating the water and having the whole community ingest this stuff. Yeah, I stopped counting because my wife gets too angry at me. I don't tell her anymore. I spent over $30,000 fighting this so far. And that includes copies, ads on TV, the radio, sending stuff out, traveling, doing a lot of different things. But let me tell you, I wouldn't change it. I'd spend $60,000 if I could. It's a fight that needs to be fought, and people have to stand up and fight against it. Like I was in the service in Nam, and my friends passed away. And I'm gonna let them down? No way. Well, of course you get angry, and there was one time I had to go before the city council. It was a big meeting. A lot of firemen were there and everything, but I got on about closing out fire stations. But the thing is, I was there and I said, look, this pediatrician who spoke about fluoride, he didn't tell the truth. As far as I'm concerned, that DR in front of his name means denial response, because this individual did not take time out to look at both sides of the issue, and he's pushing this toxin on us, and it's wrong, and I had to say something, and I went there and I said what I had to say. Of course, a lot of people were astounded that I would say something like that about a pediatrician within our community. But you know, you got to get angry once in a while and just tell them what you think. It's nice to be soft and bring the information to them, but sometimes you just got to tell them, oh, just like that. Denial response, that's all you know about fluoride. Just, you know, if the mantra is safe and effective, forget about it. You know, you got to get angry sometimes in a controlled manner and tell them how you feel. You got to get emotional about it sometimes, because if not, if you're monotone, they have to say you believe it, you feel it, it oozes from you. It's something that you're going to fight until you can't breathe anymore. Oh my God, yes, it has affected my family. Oh my God, my wife is upset. My daughter knows about it, and she's, in fact, I was holding signs one time with that fluoride sign. Fluoride's toxic, $2,000 to charge. I was holding signs by myself out, and one of her girlfriend's mothers picked her up, and they stopped at the stop sign right across from me. And the mother said, I wonder who that guy is. And my daughter slid down in the seat. She wouldn't say, that's my dad. So yeah, I guess I can embarrass, you know, she was younger then, and embarrass some people out there holding signs and doing this, because sometimes I might be the only one there, sometimes there might be 10 people there. But no matter who's there, you just have to stand up. You know, people have cursed at me from holding that sign. Some people said I'm stupid. All I say is collect the money, collect the $2,000. That's all I want you to do. Yeah, I mean, you get abused, but hey, that's what life's about. Standing up for what you believe in and taking the abuse and doing the best you can with it. But standing up and being counted is important. People call me an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, people like you shouldn't be in our community. It goes on and on like that. There are so many negative people out there that will just abuse you. But you can't give up. You keep fighting, and you keep moving on. And for the people you do find, they almost become your friends. You know, I mean, you don't see them that often, but you have a common bond and a common cause that's right and just, and that's what makes it all worth it. You have to believe it. Why would they do this? They're not getting any money. I'm not getting any money. None of us are getting any money. We're just spending it, and we're putting ourselves under the gun all the time. And so we're getting nothing except trying to help our community.
My name is Daniel Stockin. I'm a public health professional. I'm a career public health person. I got pulled into the water fluoridation issue about 6.5 years ago when my boss got a skin rash on her arm. She asked me, she's very intuitive by nature, and she said, is it possible that this fluoridated water that I'm drinking and showering in, could it be causing this skin rash that the doctors can't seem to get rid of? And so I did what I've done hundreds of times in my career. I just kind of back away from a chemical and look at how your body metabolizes it and what the target organs are, et cetera. And when I looked into this chemical fluoride, I mean, I had even worked with fluoride chemicals, some pretty dangerous ones. I had been involved in assessing and doing some work related to them, but I had never really looked at this water fluoridation issue and the chemical fluoride compounds that are used in the water. And when I looked into it, my jaw just hit the ground, and I saw all this information that was there. This was really a no-brainer. And so went to my boss and I said, you know, this is what I learned, and she was amazed, and we both were, and she told me that she didn't feel it was morally right for us to take steps to protect our own families and not to care about the other people around us. So she said, I don't know who you have to talk to, get it turned off. And so I was very green to this idea. I'm not a politician by trade or anything, and but I can tell when someone's trying to blow smoke past me on chemicals, and so I started thinking, well, I'll just talk to some people and see what happens. And I thought maybe this is a 5% of my time project for a few weeks. I was very green, I don't know. And suddenly the thing mushroomed almost overnight to where I was basically full-time at this thing, and it grew very quickly, and I began to receive correspondence from all over the planet and began to find out that this really was an issue that seemed to have a growing momentum to it. The first thing I found out is that most public health people and medical professionals don't know the basics, the fundamental issues about harm from fluorides. And that was pretty surprising for me. And I began to get some very disappointing reactions from my peers and colleagues in the public health field. And I began to see that they would jump through these contortions to continue justifying adding fluoride to drinking water. And it didn't make any sense to me because this was such an obvious situation where you can't control the dose and the chemical has effects throughout the body. So why would we be adding this to drinking water with people drinking it in unmeasured amounts? I was surprised that the public health community and the medical community was resisting this. I also found that legislators didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I even had one legislator, he told me, he said he'd been dealing, we gave him a bunch of information, and he began to look into it. Then he began to get the resistance. And so then he told me that these folks from the Dental Society had told him that they had formed a dossier on me and my boss, and I really don't care, they can form a dossier on me. But I was just sort of surprised at the pushback from people who you would think it was their job to look out for the public interest. And we haven't had the opposition where, kind of overt, yeah, we've had some people say we're strange and weird and that kind of thing. And of course, for me that was odd because I was the guy that people wanted to come clean up their chemical messes and assess the safety of chemicals and biologic agents and things like that in their work environment. So now all of a sudden people are saying, well, yeah, you did that, you used to do these things, but now we don't believe you when you're talking to us about fluorides. That's not something unique. Frankly, a lot of people who are resisting or wanting to end water fluoridation, they get resistance and they're called names, and so that's not unique. But it has been part of our experience that the resistance, it's a kind of resistance that's not so much overt as it is they question your credibility, they question your information that you have, and they even question common sense, which for me was really strange. I mean, I can understand if there was an issue with a real questionable issue of nuances about a chemical's properties and things like this. But the fundamental issues about dose and exposure and susceptible populations, these were not difficult concepts certainly for the health-trained and the science-trained people to deal with. So what I found out really is that people are not dealing with this in an intellectually honest manner and in a scientific manner. Politics, emotion, money, other things like this get involved. I find that people really, as I mentioned before, they go through these contortions to continue justifying adding fluoride when we now know the primary effect is topical, not through systemic absorption. And now that we know that people are getting it from so many different sources, meaning in their foods and medications and in residues from pesticides and fumigants and things like this, there's just, it's a thing that I call multiple source overdosing. And you know, this is not rocket science. This is real basic common sense. We sort of have this idea that they would never let us be exposed to certain kinds of things. There's this idea that they watch out for us. And I found that even amongst toxicologists and people who have really hardcore, heavy science, chemistry training and things like this, they leave behind some of the really basic tenets that are so basic and fundamental to assessing toxic effect. And you know, the margin of safety in fluoridation is really strange, where for instance, the maximum amount that's allowed in water in the US at the moment is 4 parts per million. There is no safe level for drinking water to put fluoride in there artificially. It makes no sense, because you cannot control the amount of the water that people are going to drink. You're going to have some people who drink 4 to 5 or 6 times more than someone else. You're also going to have some people whose body weight is double or triple that of other people who are drinking it. The very idea that you can give uncontrolled, unmeasured amounts of a substance that bioaccumulates in your body over your lifetime to people of varying medical susceptibilities and unknown medical histories makes absolutely no sense. This violates all the basic fundamental tenets of modern pharmacology and toxicology. It's kind of a little bit sad for me. It's a little bit sad when I find dentists, first of all, they're not allowed to practice in an area that's not their expertise, and they can't make statements about other areas of the body and how your body will react, and various organ systems outside the mouth will react to fluorides. And I have found dentists who really don't, many dentists who don't understand that they're treading on really thin ice. But when they talk about, oh, it's safe. Well, I would expect a dentist can talk to me some about what happens in the tissues and things inside my mouth. But it doesn't make any sense, obviously, for people with oral health training to make inferences or direct statements that my kidneys are not impacted by this when they don't know even the basic information about kidney impacts. And they certainly don't know my medical history, and they don't know all these other things that might affect my health. So I find that there are some dentists, though, that have sort of gotten it about fluoride, but very few of them will speak out. There's just this inordinate amount of pressure from the dental societies and the dental infrastructure to keep people on the talking points about fluoride. Don't go beyond the talking points, and trust your dental society, trust the people, your peers and your grad school teachers. And it's very disturbing for me as a public health person, but you know, I'm not a doctor, I don't pretend to be, but I can tell when someone's talked to me about issues of toxics assessment and chemical exposures. I can tell when, based on my career background and my training, that I can see when people are speaking out of school, when they're speaking beyond their level of knowledge. And I have found virtually, well, very, very few people in the dental arena, and even physicians, who know the most up-to-date information, the toxic data, the tox data, and some of the other information that's coming out from all around the world. It's hard enough, I mean, I don't kid myself, I know what it's like to try to keep up with literature just in a certain discipline. And you know, it's hard for doctors. They've got all kinds of things coming at them. So I understand that they can't understand and know everything, but there's some basic fundamental things that they shouldn't set aside when they're looking at this. I've seen that when we get in the room with people who are promoting fluoridation, very often they wind up embarrassing themselves. And I hate to do that. It's never my intention. I shouldn't say it's never my intention. Occasionally there are people that just need to be embarrassed, but that's not my personality to want to just embarrass people. But after repeated efforts to educate them, they've continued to just stonewall and not look at the information, and they want to stick their head in the sand. I have no heartburn if they wind up embarrassing themselves. I'll give you an example of what happened. One time I was in a meeting at a city council, and a state dental officer came in, and one of the city council people said, and this is on tape, I mean, they said, where are we getting the fluoride that we're using? And this dentist said, who was a dental officer for the state, said, I don't know. Well, that wasn't true because I had already given the information to the person. And then they said, well, you don't know. She said, so you're not aware that the fluoride we're using is the collected air emissions of the phosphate fertilizer industry, and you're the state dental officer, and you don't know this stuff, where the fluoride comes from? You could have heard a pin drop in the council chambers. It was, when I think back on it, it was this electric moment. You know, the incredulity that was expressed by the council representative that a state dental person who's paid and has responsibility to know this kind of information didn't know that information. It was so illustrative to me of the vast amount of ignorance which is in the medical and dental communities, which has allowed fluoridation to continue. Why is that? Because people don't have the time, sometimes don't have the interest either, to want to know this information for themselves. They want to believe the experts, the people that trained them. And what I've come to find out is that, and this is a disturbing thing to hear, but for every citizen that hears this, they have to understand our doctors, our dentists make big mistakes sometimes, big ones. And our government regulatory agencies make huge mistakes sometimes, and sometimes they don't get called on the carpet, but sometimes they do. So this has been something that I think we're going to see more and more of, that doctors and dentists, who are not the enemy, by the way, they're not. I mean, I think that there's other groups of people who are actively working that the primary people is not necessarily to blame the doctors and dentists. Having said that though, there's some real fundamental things that a doctor should recognize instantly, things about uncontrolled dose, things about enhanced susceptibility for certain population groups like diabetics and kidney patients, things like that. They need to know that information. One of the things at the Lilly Center that we began to focus on was disproportionate harm by fluorides to minorities, particularly Black Americans. We got interested in this when we began to look at some of the information that was coming out from the Centers for Disease Control. Back in 2005, they published in their MMWR publication some of their own information on a number of oral health issues and developments. And one of the things was that they talked about dental fluorosis, this teeth staining and pitting that's caused by overexposure to fluorides as a young child. And there's a chart. Now in this particular MMWR publication, it was a lengthy paper in there, and it had a whole boatload of charts and diagrams. Well, buried in the very back, in the very last, I think 23rd out of 23 charts, is this little bit of information that talked about the amount of increase in dental fluorosis that had happened relatively recently compared to the previous look-see at it. And they found out that they were describing the amount of dental fluorosis of various conditions, meaning very mild, moderate, or severe, in different racial groups. And I looked at this and my eyes just opened up really wide, and I saw that there was significantly more of this dental fluorosis disfigurement happening in Black Americans. And so I began to look to see, well, had anybody bothered to share this with the Black community? And it was very sad to see that no, there really wasn't an effort to share this. And it's not just the black community, it's also Hispanics and other groups. But we began to sort of reach out into the black community to say, have you ever heard this? I began talking to health professionals and to just black advocacy groups and things like that. I would show members of the black community and leaders pictures of it. I said, you ever seen anybody that has this in their teeth? Oh yeah, sure, I've seen that. And are you aware of what caused it? No, isn't that because they just didn't brush their teeth well? And you know, there's this vast ignorance about it. And we began to ask CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and other groups, what have you done to specifically educate, for instance, the black community about this? And it was amazing, the reaction we got. They'll do anything to not talk about the fact that they have not shared this openly. Sure, they put it in a tiny little table buried in the back of a study that's in a publication that hardly anybody but us nerds look at, right, on the internet. And then we found out last fall, meaning the fall of '09, that there was a study in the Journal of Public Health Dentistry, a dental journal, that they concluded that black children are ingesting significantly more fluorides than white children. And so here's what we've got. We now have evidence that there is more exposure in the black community and significantly greater harm, meaning the dental fluorosis disfigurement. So you've got greater exposure and harm. A lot of people, and this is very sad, are so embarrassed and humiliated by what's on their teeth. They won't even allow us to take a picture of just the teeth and the lips. No identifying marks or anything, you know, above the lips or anything like that, or below the chin. There's a significant group of people who really need to have this information, whose lives have been devastated. They don't want to go on job interviews. They don't want to go on, their social interactions have been affected. Their personality is affected. And it goes way beyond, of course, members of the black community. Anyone who has dental fluorosis, this can be an issue. But we began to find that there's other economic issues, and now that there's been an admission that making baby formula with fluoridated city water, that parents might want to rethink that kind of idea because it may cause dental fluorosis. That information really hasn't been shared with the black community, with the white community, with moms in general. It just hasn't. So one of our emphases has been to deal with the issue of harm to the black citizens. And also, because we got involved in the kidney impact issue. We were involved in getting the National Kidney Foundation to withdraw their endorsement of water fluoridation. And the black community is, of course, disproportionately harmed by kidney disease. So this is another reason why issue of the news about harm from fluoride should be shared openly. Infant formula is, to me, a really important issue because many people, as we're sitting here talking right now, they go to their sink. They don't have resources to get unfluoridated water or to get an expensive home water filtration system. And there's plenty of single parents right now and others who are just economically disadvantaged and others who just don't get the information of all social strata. They go to their kitchen sink to fill up to use the water for mixing their baby's milk formula. And you know, the National Research Council said in 2006 in their report on fluorides that infants and children in our country are ingesting 3 to 4 times the amount of fluoride as adults are on a body weight basis. And this is really serious because babies and children's bodies the cells and tissues are growing and cells are dividing so rapidly. So, you know, the impact is really significant. And the idea that it's only an issue for dental fluorosis in these children, that just flies against all sense of reason and common sense. Obviously, the fluoride doesn't just touch their teeth-forming cells, it's going into their brain-forming cells and all throughout their whole body. So we found that this issue is something that is really important for moms, for caregivers, for child caregivers. There's just so many people grandparents, parents, who should have this information, but because the Centers for Disease Control buried the information on this obscure web page and didn't bother to issue a press release when they changed their stance. I mean, to say that parents may wish to, if they're concerned about fluorosis, they may wish to avoid the fluoridated water. That's really very disingenuous, and that's being kind in how I express it. These are some of the most vulnerable of our society, little babies, whose entire lives from this point forward are being impacted by what happens as their body is forming. Who promotes fluorides and the use of fluorides in water fluoridation? At the beginning, when I started looking into this, I had certain ideas about who would be involved in this. There's obviously the people who historically have had interest in dealing with fluoride issues. You know, the manufacturers of certain manufacturing processes that had to deal with fluorides as a byproduct or inherent in what they were doing. But the issue of getting rid of the air pollutant emissions that come off of making fertilizer, phosphate fertilizers, and, you know, trying to turn something that's a liability, which going through a smokestack and landing on cows and crops and everything else around, you know, that was a liability. And now to be able to turn that into a marketable product, to collect it using these air pollution scrubbers, and then take that product and this liquor, if you will, and be able to, instead of having to dispose of it in a landfill, or instead of having to try to deal with the emissions issues in the air, to be able to sell it and basically just sort of disperse it into the public water system and into people's bodies. Talk about the ultimate way to take a problem and turn it into a positive, at least in terms of cash flow. And, you know, that's what occurred in this scenario. There's a lot of people who push fluorides for a number of different uses. And it's not just for water fluoridation. Obviously, it's used in oral care products and other things. I think and in fact I know this is what's going to occur, at some point the public is going to associate the term fluoride and recoil at the term the way they do when they hear the word arsenic. You know, you kind of think, ugh, when someone says the word arsenic. Well, you need to be thinking about fluoride that way because fluoride, because of its properties, it's a very dangerous chemical, certainly to be ingesting it over long-term and uncontrolled amounts. The future of water fluoridation is all downhill. This thing's going to collapse. Water fluoridation is a house of cards that is wobbling. It is going to collapse. It violates so many fundamental tenets of ethics, scientific study and practice, pharmacology, toxicology, and there's just a whole host of reasons, liability reasons and other things like this, to where it's obvious that water fluoridation is going to end. The only issue for me is how fast is it going to occur? There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be really, I think, concerned about their personal liability in this issue because many people knew better and they had the information and they didn't act. They allowed the pressures of their professional sort of societies and peers to cause them to compromise their morals, to compromise their scientific principles. And, you know, when the house of cards collapses, it's going to expose something that Americans maybe are not going to be real enthused about seeing. Because, you know, we as Americans, we want to believe that our doctors and our dentists and our public health system is really after our best interest. But when it comes right down to it, there's been an awful lot of influence exerted and money passed through, back and forth through sometimes legitimate channels. But when the money trail shows up and when the liability thing, when the smoke clears, there's going to be a lot of organizations and individuals and professionals who are going to wish that they had weathered the pressure put on them by pro-fluoride groups. Because, you know, it's always better to, the truth, the funny thing, you know what the funny thing about truth is? After everything else is all collapsed around it, truth is still going to be standing. Truth doesn't need to be defended, but you know, it does help if we get ourselves in alignment with what's real and true. Truth is always going to be standing at the end of the game. But there are going to be people who are going to rue the day that they were just too concerned about what people were going to say about them and too concerned about the effect on their careers. Kidney patients should be told that fluorides accumulate more dramatically in their bones because their kidneys can't help excrete it out of their body. They have damaged function in that respect. And, you know, and there's other impacts inside their body. There's actual damage to the kidneys themselves, not just the bones. So that's just one small group. When you look at the numbers and crunch the numbers, look at this. You've got, what is it, 1 in 9 American adults has some form of kidney disease. Crunch the numbers. See how many potentially upset people there are. How many people are diabetics? And right now there's something like 50+ million pre-diabetics who they're thinking are going to convert many of them to diabetes. And the National Research Council said that diabetics, kidney patients, and seniors and infants, among other groups, are a susceptible subpopulation that is particularly vulnerable to harm from ingested fluorides. So just crunch the numbers. This is going to dwarf asbestos and tobacco in the course because of the sheer numbers of people and the breadth of the conditions which are impacted by the fluorides. Back around 1999, 2000, when it came out formally so that the primary effect in preventing cavities was through topical means rather than systemic absorption. In other words, when the fluorides touch the teeth in the mouth, that is the primary. And that's very important to say. The dentists have admitted this is the primary, very key word, primary way that fluoride works. And they try to say now, well, there's both systemic and topical benefits. And they try to say it gets in your saliva and bathes your teeth topically, but the amount that's in, CDC knows this, and they've admitted, that the amount that's in the saliva is such a small amount, concentration, that it's really not going to have much impact in preventing cavities. So the very rationale that started fluoridation, which was systemic absorption, has been invalidated back in around 99 and 2000. That should have ended fluoridation right there. That was enough to just end water fluoridation. Because the primary original rationale had been invalidated. But of course the story keeps changing, the target keeps moving, and they find other justifications to keep fluoride in there. Why? It's damage control, it's risk management, it's trying to find a way to justify things rather than to call a thing exactly the way it is. When I began to look into this to see the history of how water fluoridation began, I began to look to see what was the breadth of the types of studies that were done that justified the addition of fluoride into drinking water. And I began to find out that there was virtually no look-see at long-term low-dose effect on kidneys. No one had looked at thyroid and formally studied that, if thyroid impacts. And when you think of all the ladies, particularly today, that have hypothyroidism, I can tell you, I talked to a lot of these folks that have hypothyroidism, and they become white with anger when they find out the possibility, the fact that their thyroid condition may have been caused or exacerbated by fluorides. And that's very disturbing. So when I began to find out that this thing at the very beginning when they introduced it was mostly dental studies that were done, again, it just showed you that I think for the most part people, it wasn't like this large number of people trying to conspire to do this. People wanted to prevent cavities. They just did. And they had good intentions. The vast majority of people had good intentions. But that doesn't justify the fact that they did not look at whole body impacts and brain impacts. The National Research Council said in 2006 that more studies are needed on how fluoride impacts the human brain. I think they said to clarify the impact on the human brain. I actually have people come up to me after reading that and they say, wait a minute, you mean we fluoridate and we don't know what it does to the human brain? And they're blown away by that. And of course they should be. We do hear the CDC and other people talk just ad nauseum about how there's supposedly 60 years of studies showing fluoride to be safe and effective. And the interesting thing is that if that's true, then why did the National Research Council's report in 2006 come up with literally volumes of research that has never been done, that they say should be done on the impacts of fluorides? And it wasn't that. They're not saying study high doses. Sometimes they're talking about study this at 1 part per million to 4 parts per million. Study it at low levels and varying levels. So I don't buy it when people say the National Research Council report has nothing to do with fluoridation. That report showed that it acknowledged that fluoridation began without really knowing what the impacts were going to be on kidney patients. So this idea that there's 60 years of studies, that's just simply not true. Let's just call it what it is. It's just not true. The vast majority of the people that are promoting this for the past number of few decades at least are really just, at least the dentists and doctors, they're just kind of in lockstep with the mothership, if you will. They're saying what their dental societies and medical societies give them to say. It's not that the vast majority of them are some sort of plotting people with malintent. Now, there are some people, of course, who make money on this whole fluoride thing. There are dentists, and let's be real about it, the fastest growing sector of the dental industry, I'm told, is the cosmetic side of it, the cosmetic dentistry side of it. And yes, dentists do make money fixing dental fluorosis in people. And do they tell them that fluoride's caused it? In many cases, and the people we talk with, no, they were not told. People are under the impression that it was their lack of oral hygiene and taking care of their teeth and things like this. But this idea of how do you approach sharing the story, I don't find a lot of benefit, frankly, in going down roads and talking about these things that I can't prove, that they're these legends that are just kind of all over the internet in some places. But there is plenty of science now to end fluoridation. There just is. So there's also the ethics issues. There's economic issues. So we stick with those because they're real and provable. And I just encourage people to stick with the things that don't get you labeled, needlessly so, as somebody strange. I mean, look at me. I mean, I'm one of these people that dealt with radioactive materials, biologic agents, chemical hazards. I'm the former manager of the EPA Western Regional Lead Training Center. My career path was just normal and straight, you know, and graduate training in public health and emphasis in environmental health. And, you know, there are people that will say, well, you're just using weird science, and they say worse things than that to me. But when they say that, you know, they don't address the specifics of what we say. They rely on endorsements. They rely on generalities. They don't deal with the specific science. They don't deal with the specific issues of dose that's uncontrolled, and what about safety margins and all these kind of things. They tend to want to shoot the messenger, and they tend to want to switch the subject, change it to something else, and use circular reasoning and logic. And frankly, you know, the days of that being effective are rapidly dwindling. And I'm really excited to say that, because I can see now that people are being called on the carpet more and more. And now that the attorneys are getting involved, I talk to attorneys all across the country with more and more regularity now, and they're waking up to this issue. That's really critical, that the people get put under oath who've been not telling the truth, who've been avoiding telling the truth. There are certain questions CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they simply have refused to answer. They'll do anything besides answering these questions. They'll dance. They'll cite organizations that endorse what they're doing, but they won't answer some really key specific questions. How do you control the dose of fluoride that a person gets? How about this? How does a person find out how much is in their bones right now, today? Do they want to do a painful bone biopsy? No, they're not going to do that. You can't really know how much is in your pineal gland. You can't know how much is in your bones. You can't know some of these really important things. With water fluoridation, how are you going to, for the people that want to avoid getting the dental fluorosis and they don't have money to get a filtration system, they don't have money, you know, for their children I'm talking about, and they don't, or they want to avoid it for their home, who's going to pay? You know, there's a lot of these kinds of questions that people just have never been forced to answer, and when people get put under oath, watch what happens when some smart attorneys really press hard on the questions that no one has ever been forced to answer. I think this moment today, and as we're talking here, this is mid-2010, and what's going to happen? I think we're going to see a real acceleration of bad news about fluoride. It's all bad news. It's all downhill. I would not want to be promoting fluoride these days. I wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's just, from a risk management standpoint, it's not worth the risk financially, to people's health, for litigation purposes, etc. The Lilly Center is a very small public health training firm, and we got pulled into it just because of this health impact that had happened to my boss. She believed in this so strongly that she mortgaged her house. And that's, we're not backed by some big corporation or anything like that. I maxed my credit cards, she mortgaged her house. And we began to just talk to people to see who it was, to educate ourselves, to find out who had the authority and the power to bring change. And we found out that there was this sort of chain of deferred authority all over the place, that no one really, this is a hot potato, no one wanted to be the one who sort of stood out first on it. You know how politicians, they don't want to get on board a train until they see which way the train is heading? That just irritates the heck out of me when they're supposed to be serving the public good. And we began to find out that many politicians just don't have a spine. They don't have morals. And so what we found out is we've just been, our approach is kind of very really, it's been to follow our intuition. I find in my life that even though I have all this scientific training, that my gut, my intuition, is really the way to sort of steer how we go. That's how we got into this issue of kidneys and impact on kidney patients, and look what happened. We had, the National Kidney Foundation removed their endorsement. My boss said to me one day, she said, we really need to reach out to the black community. It's important to do that. She's not a member of the black community, but she just felt that inside her, intuition said that. So we did, and suddenly all these doors began to open. We began to talk to all kinds of really interesting and neat people in the black community, and we began to get endorsements towards ending fluoridation. I have letters from a very broad spectrum of influential people in the black community. This is something when people can see it. It's really crucial to be able to physically, visibly see the impact of fluorides. Otherwise, fluoridation and fluorides can sound kind of dry and abstract. It's just this chemical, people's eyes can roll back in their head when you start talking about chemicals. When we began to actually say, hey, let's start talking to people, show me your teeth, and looking at people's mouths when they were talking to us, striking up conversations. Yes, there's a lot of dental fluorosis that's out there. We think that as more and more people find out about this, and they find out the cost that's going to take to fix their teeth. If you get teeth veneers, I'm told that by a friend who's a cosmetic dentist that it can cost $100,000 over your lifetime to keep replacing these things about every 10 years or so. It's a real impact, and it affects people's personality development, their social skills. I had a young lady, she was so candid with us. Just so candid. She said, this is just going to break a lot of people's hearts if this continues, because she talked about how it had impacted her. And my heart just went out to her. I know there's plenty of other stuff that we all have to deal with, in life here. But this is something this is a no-brainer. We need to end water fluoridation.
I'm Albert Bergsteller, Professor Emeritus of Chemistry at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. My research on fluorine actually began in connection with my organic chemistry research, making fluoroproline, which is an amino acid with a ring, and putting that fluorine in there made some differences in how it would behave in some biochemistry and the biosynthesis of collagen. During the course of that research, I began doing more reading about fluoride and in general as a negative ion of the element fluorine. Now, in the course of that reading, I discovered that it causes effects on the thyroid gland. Intake of about 4 to 5 milligrams of fluoride per day will depress thyroid function. And the reason that became of interest to me is because I myself had been diagnosed with a low thyroid function a few years earlier after I came to Lawrence, Kansas. My doctor was puzzled by why it was happening, and it put me on the thyroid extract to control it, but nothing beneficial was happening. I had a whole series of symptoms that bothered me: waking up tired, feeling a dry throat, a bloated feeling in the stomach, some headaches, aching joints, and it just didn't seem right, but particularly the tiredness after what should have been a good night's sleep. So the doctor diagnosed me as having a low thyroid function with a basal metabolism of -22. This was about 2 or 3 years after I came to Lawrence in 1956. So I persisted with this situation, but I noticed I was drinking a lot of water, as much as 4 or 5 quarts a day, which would have given me the equivalent of 4 or 5 milligrams of fluoride per day. So I immediately thought, well, maybe if I just switch to non-fluoridated water, might see whether I'm one of these persons who's sensitive to fluoride. And sure enough, after a few days, I noticed my dry throat disappeared, waking up more refreshed. Gradually, the aching joints disappeared. A whole series of changes took place spontaneously, even though I then stopped taking the thyroid extract. Well, I persisted in this new pattern for about 3 months, called my doctor up and told him I'd like to have a new check on my basal metabolism because I'd been doing something different. And sure enough, he checked it out and found it was right back to normal at 0 and stayed that way since. And the more I read, the more I realized this was a very serious problem that had been largely excluded from the standard textbooks and the main reading that people would ordinarily do. At that point, I had thought fluoride was perfectly safe, was definitely beneficial, and from all the further reading of the literature that was excluded, I saw that was not the case. I also found that fluoridated toothpaste was causing mouth sores, and they disappeared when I switched to non-fluoridated toothpaste. I started reading papers by Dr. George Walbot, who was an allergist in Detroit, who had made discoveries himself on reversible toxic effects of fluoride back in the early 50s, and had published quite a bit, but most of it had been excluded from the mainstream purview and the public health literature. So it was in the course of meeting him after I discovered my own problem in 1965 that I got a chance to work with him on the journal he founded called Fluoride, the publication that became the official quarterly journal of the International Society for Fluoride Research. And I've been connected with that ever since. And in 1998, I became the editor when the late Dr. John Colquhoun was unable to continue it. From the very beginning, we'd hoped that we would get the journal Fluoride covered or indexed in PubMed, which at that time was known as the Index Medicus, and then later became Medline, which is kind of a source of all of the major biomedical journals, some dealing with environmental problems, but it's a broad spectrum of coverage of journals all over the world to give the titles and the authors, and the person looking at that will be able to feel that he's covered the major important literature of the world. Well, it turned out that fluoride was a little bit too much for them to take, and they excluded it from PubMed on the grounds that it was not a mainstream science or whatever reason they wanted to give. Subsequently, we had our board of editors, distinguished scientists all over the world, writing to them asking to get it into PubMed. They continually refused. And then a few years ago, Dr. Spittle and I made out a more formal application that they had kept changing the ground rules for getting in. And we submitted that, and the review committee said, well, it was about of 100 and some journals, we were not high enough up to get accepted. And that, of course, was kind of funny because they wouldn't give us the reasons or anything. They then said, well, we'll have a collateral review, which is a secondary review of that. We'll have 3 members of that, and you can nominate some people for that, and we did. And the people we nominated were highly qualified in the field of fluoride research, and then we found out later none of them had even been consulted or asked to serve on this review panel. And the new report came out with some very specious reasons for rejecting fluoride, such as, well, you refer to too many papers in your own journal, which would be expected. There wasn't a proper protocol for doing fetal research, and that research was done in other countries, so the protocol would be different. The animal studies were not enough detail. Well, they were well-known procedures for studying rats, and we followed all those. The human studies did not reach proper endpoints. Well, they were described in great deal. So the whole thing was nothing but a sham to say that those were valid reasons to exclude it. And then they even wrote a letter saying, well, we don't see many papers on the pro-fluoride side, and I sent in a whole group of lists of papers with abstracts that we had actually covered pro-literature very well in our journal. So that's where it stands today. They've rejected it on what I think are specious and really quite innocuous grounds, and we'd like certainly to get this straightened out, because what happens in the biomedical literature, people will go to the PubMed or Medline, and if they don't find something there, they feel it's probably not been published. Now, they could go to SciFinder Scholar, published by the American Chemical Society, where fluoride has been included right from the beginning. Web of Science is another retrieval engine that would get them access to fluoride, or even going to Google, they will find a great deal of research published in fluoride in that way. But most scientists today that deal with biomedical problems in the field of dentistry and public health and so on restrict their research surveys of the literature to PubMed Medline. Now, one of the main reasons I've stuck so hard and so long with this is the fact that fluoride in fluoridation, fluoridated toothpaste, and in fluorine in various medical products has an enormous impact on people who are sensitive to fluoride. And so we have a large number of people in any population that are suffering very serious ill effects from fluoride. The arthritic symptoms can become crippling in many cases, and the gastrointestinal disturbances can be very disturbing. Effects on the skin can be very troublesome. So all in all, some reversible, some not. Connections with cancer is a very real problem. My own research on Down syndrome showed that there's a connection, at least in the early years of a woman's life where she's having babies, can have a greater incidence of Down syndrome babies when she's in a fluoridated versus a non-fluoridated community. And very recently we've got new data showing that the failure of many women to have full-term babies or developing a lot of anemia during pregnancy can be caused by the fact that too much fluoride is preventing the absorption of folic acid and iron, which are very critical to have healthy babies. And this whole picture of the toxic effects of fluoride, depending on a person's genetics, their health, and their state of nutrition, can be very important. People with excellent nutrition, plenty of protein in their diets, will usually be much less sensitive to fluoride than those who have poor living conditions and less nutritious diets. And that has turned out to be the real key factor in so much variability. In the inner cities where people may have high sugary diets without good enough nutrients, they're going to suffer more tooth decay and ill effects from fluoride than those who have better diets. Well, the original studies behind fluoridation came about during the 1930s when the question arose what was causing dental fluorosis. And when that was discovered to be fluoride in the water at very low concentrations, some studies were made to suggest that maybe it also may be related to tooth decay being less in those areas with fluoride. Well, the problem with that was that those waters generally had more calcium and magnesium, which is beneficial for teeth, and also more exposure to sunshine. So there were covariables that weren't properly sorted out. But some of the original data, when looked at closely, really didn't show that good a correlation. Later they then picked some cities that had lower tooth decay rates and gradual increases of fluoride level in the drinking water and thought they had a good correlation with more fluoride, less tooth decay, more fluoride, more dental fluorosis. The latter correlation holds up all over the world. More fluoride, more dental fluorosis. But the correlation between more fluoride and less tooth decay has not held up. Well, Grand Rapids was my hometown. I grew up in Grand Rapids in early 1930s and went to high school there, and we had examination of our teeth when I was in my senior year because they started fluoridation in Grand Rapids in 1945. And what was done there was examination of the children in all the schools. I think there were 26 or 20, no, there were 78 schools, that's what it was. And they're a very large population. Well, to follow that up would have been rather unwieldy, so they cut it down to about 26 schools or so. And for the following years, they then kept a record of how the tooth decay went from year to year. Muskegon, Michigan, which also uses Lake Michigan water, as Grand Rapids did, was supposed to be the control. But at that same time, the tooth decay in Muskegon without fluoridation was going down just as it was in Grand Rapids. And when they look more closely at, when one looks more closely at the Grand Rapids data, it turns out that all of the tooth decay essentially went down the first year by that selection of a smaller number of schools. And there was no real progressive decline in tooth decay at all in Grand Rapids. And so that whole study was really not successful as a real science. Well, I think that when it first began, with the rosy prospects, they were pushing it. But after, I think, 10 or 15 years, when they saw data indicating it was not working, it should have been stopped. And as a scientist, I think people should be willing to look at hard data and not just stick to a plan that they thought was working. I think right now it's a matter of such embarrassment to the Public Health Service to admit that they made a big mistake, and the liabilities for having harmed people must loom very large in their minds for this. And certainly that's true also in Canada, where there's great concern about liability for having fluoridation. So they've tried to make it such that it's a legitimate power of the government to do this without liability. The same thing in Great Britain. But in the English-speaking world, there seems to be a resistance to modifying or changing, although there are places now where they're trying to cut the levels back to lower intakes, to kind of a modification of a withdrawal from fluoridation. But it's really quite a waste when you think of the cost of adding these fluoride chemicals and the equipment and the control and so forth for something that's not working, causing a lot of damage to the plumbing and the machinery that is involved, and the dangers of overdosage, which frequently, and the harm that can cause. When you put it all together, it seems absolutely crazy to have such a very small fraction of the water being used for a purpose that's not even working. Well, the precautionary principle is a good one, because what it says in effect is if you have evidence, even though it's somewhat uncertain or questionable, you should go with the side of being cautious and not taking unnecessary risks. So without benefit, what is the point of this? That's the part that really seems very disturbing now, when we can show that their claims of benefit are faulty and there's not much real benefit from fluoride in reducing tooth decay. Furthermore, from the standpoint of mechanism, getting fluoride passing over the teeth in the drinking water is such a low concentration it can't possibly affect the enzymes on the teeth and so around the saliva and whatnot. So the question is, how is it working? Well, they're saying it promotes remineralization of the teeth from the calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, particularly calcium, phosphorus in the saliva. Well, that's very questionable with that short passage time, and then other studies have shown that it takes a lot longer time of contact for that to actually work that way. Once the fluoride from the water gets in the body, then there's a whole series of bodily reactions that take place that are very unsatisfactory. So altogether, from a mechanistic standpoint, it's not good. Have I felt marginalized as a scientist from opposing fluoridation? Not really at the university, because we've got a more open-minded group. My colleagues in chemistry have understood that I wouldn't be opposing fluoridation without sound scientific reasons. So there's been no problem from that standpoint. But from the standpoint of the dental people, the public health people, certainly. At one time they even approached the chancellor to have me silenced at the University of Kansas. But after he saw my research, he said there's no point in even going into this, because obviously Dr. Bergstaller has looked at this very closely and does not have any reason to be silenced for what he's done. Well, I've been in a number of forums and confrontations with the proponents, and generally speaking, they avoid getting into the specific scientific details. They rest their case on the endorsements of the American Dental Association and the various public health associations and so on. So when you ask them what's the basis of these endorsements, they say, well, they've looked at it carefully and so forth. They say, well, how do you know they have? Well, they don't know that. And you say, well, the current evidence, the endorsements are out of date, in other words. So my experience is that they're resting on what was said and proposed some 50, 60 years ago, and since then they've not been able to update it with sufficient evidence scientifically to back it up as being safe or effective. Well, it's preserving their own position, and it's very difficult for people to retract something they've told the public it works, and now it's difficult to go back on that. I have sat down on a more individual basis with some of these proponents and presented evidence, and the net result is they say, well, I'll have to see more evidence and see it confirmed. I want to have more proof. And I said, well, how much proof does it take if it gets confirmed over and over again in different places over the years? Their problem is that they want to see it confirmed more in the United States. Well, in the United States, one cannot get research funding from the government that might question fluoridation. In the same way as true in Canada and England. The people who are finding all these negative results, generally speaking, are in Japan, China, India, the Middle East, Africa, and so forth. And so those countries don't have that restriction on funding to find out more about how fluoride actually works and what it's doing. Fluoride will interfere with various enzymes very dramatically at different concentrations And that's where probably a lot of the harm comes at the biochemical level. Getting into the stomach, there's enough acidity in the stomach to convert the fluoride ion into HF, hydrogen fluoride, which is very tissue irritating and penetrating, and also then causes the prevention of a lot of the absorption of necessary nutrients. The fact that it locks up in the bones, the insoluble calcium fluoroapatite, and depending on what stage and what point that's happening, it may have some adverse effects, creating brittleness in the bones, less tensile strength, and so on. And then in the teeth, of course, as the enamels being formed, is irregularity of the enamel formation. The presence of fluoride can cause the enamel fluorosis, which is staining of the teeth, which is very deep and very hard to bleach out, and so on. The other side of the coin is neurological effects, the effects on the central nervous system and the brain during early fetal stages, to causing a lower IQ, attention span deficits, visual acuity problems. So all of these things, a broad spectrum of effects of fluoride once it's in the body, from the standpoint of the muscular, the neurological, the skeletal, and so on. The Grand Rapids study was probably done as a demonstration to show that what was present naturally in places that they had looked at, Colorado and Texas, where they thought they saw less tooth decay, would be a demonstration. And they also did the similar experiment at the same time up in Newburgh, New York. So Grand Rapids, Michigan was a kind of a pilot study and was not felt to be an experiment entirely. They thought they had enough basis from natural fluoride so that they imitate that level at 1 part per million, they would see the benefit. And at that time they were actually using sodium fluoride, not sodium silicate fluoride, which is quite a bit different from the standpoint of its biochemistry, or hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is widely used today. Well, I think they started off with good intentions, but as soon as they saw that the effects were not what they thought they would be, they should have called a halt and said, let's re-examine what we're doing. But I think the public in Grand Rapids was deceived in thinking that it would be absolutely safe on the basis of limited studies of natural fluoride areas, and that I think proved to be quite fallacious. How long will it persist, and when will we see the end of it? Quite frankly, I'm not sure I'll even live to see the end of it, because I'm 82 years old now, and it's hard to know how much longer they can hang on with this. But if they can keep up their wall of censorship for another 5 or 10 years, it probably can persist, because the promotion is still going strong and heavy, and people in city councils and legislatures are still being convinced that it's safe and effective, and that those who are opposing it really don't have much evidence, and so forth. If they could break the barriers of communication, then I think it could end very quickly.
I think I figured out that fluoride was a problem when I was about 30 years old. I'd had a baby and I wasn't tolerating my toothpaste. It made my gums bleed and I had cankers after brushing my teeth with fluoride toothpaste, so I stopped using it. I didn't really know the full extent of how fluoride was affecting me until I got involved with the Fluoride Action Network around 2001, I think, when I realized that I had been severely fluoride poisoned after surgery because a general anesthetic has fluoride drug in it. And I just wasn't able to tolerate it because of my previous level of fluoride poisoning. Because I had been born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was the first artificially fluoridated city in the world, I had a total body burden load of fluoride stored that was now putting me at risk of the tiniest additional exposure from food, water, and air pollution, let alone prescription drugs. So my life was pretty constrained because I just had to walk this real tightrope of avoiding accidental exposure, or else I would get really ill and I wouldn't be able to function. Chronic depression and insomnia and thyroid issues, none of those were ever handled properly by any doctor I ever saw. But then for several years I had a really great family doctor who himself had chemical sensitivity, so he got it. And he was the only one I ever met who was open to the idea that fluoride was part of the problem. Other than that, most public health officials and dental people treat me with contempt. How dare I question their expertise? How dare I even propose that any of my problems and symptoms and lab reports have anything to do with this wonderful program of public health, which only helps everyone. My sister and I were born in the first 10 years of the fluoridation experiment. Our teeth were not improved. We had tons of cavities. I had cavities even before I had my adult teeth. Like before age 6, I had cavities. I had mercury fillings before I even went to school. And so did my sister. So if we were the target recipients of all that benefit, how come it didn't work? In fact, there were hundreds of Grand Rapids children who, like us, who clearly did not have better teeth as young children, and we were just dropped from the studies. They just didn't follow us, they didn't include us. They picked and chose children who didn't have cavities and then made it up to look like it was a grand success. And that was part of the big fraud. But it spread everywhere in North America and then to other parts of the world as a direct result. And I, as a grown woman, really resent being used fraudulently that way when I was an innocent child who couldn't possibly have voted for this. My early exposure in Grand Rapids is one of the reasons why my health is affected today. We now know that the load you get from conception to birth is very important. We know that the fetus and child are most vulnerable to fluoride toxicity. And this is because the fetus cannot excrete fluoride. The fetus incorporates everything in the mother's blood that it sent. Remember, this whole thing was a big success. The Grand Rapids trial was the basis for selling it to the rest of the world. I do think they had a foregone conclusion. They were either convinced that this was a good thing or they had an ulterior motive, but either way, it was a foregone conclusion and they just built everything around it to make it so. I see my role as an activist to first offer help and information to other fluoride-poisoned victims. I have done dozens of deputations now to committees and city councils, and the overwhelming response has been cold contempt. Get me off the stage, take the microphone away from me, get me out of there. They just don't want to hear it. The response from environmental groups and citizen activist groups and ordinary voters groups is very different. They always get it. Who's responsible? My guess is that in Canada it is faceless bureaucrats behind Health Canada giving false information and outright lies to the officials that we elect to make policy and uphold our laws. And we can't reach them. They're they're under a cone of silence or something, but they have incredible power to manipulate public health policy and laws in this country, and that's wrong. I guess the personal thing for me is that I want to know why I and other fluoride-poisoned people seem to be invisible. Like, why don't we count? When they say the benefits outweigh the risk or that the risk is negligible, what risk are they talking about? Are they talking about the risk to me, like my lead poisoning and my thyroid disease and the years of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia? Is that what they're talking about? Is that what they really think is negligible? And if so, where is the statute that gave them the authority to do that to me? Where is the statute that gave them the authority to do that to my daughters who have dental fluorosis and thyroid issues? Why don't we count? When they talk about the benefit to all, why aren't we included? We didn't benefit. This so-called experiment or trial in Grand Rapids and Brantford and Newburgh and Kingston was not a trial at all. I mean, they were experimenting with human beings in direct opposition to the Nuremberg Code that had been adopted at the end of the Second World War. And the so-called democratic American system let them get away with it. And so did the Canadians, and so did the Irish, and so did the Australian, and so did the South American. All these so-called democratic states and countries did one of the most undemocratic things to its people that you could ever possibly do. And that is to deny them the right, the fundamental right to water that does not contain a toxic medication. How do you counter a lie? You keep on telling the truth until you die.